Virtually unknown within modern-day Christianity, the Book of Jubilees has been held within the Ethiopic Bible and was found preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where 15 copies in Hebrew were collected, the sixth most amongst the thousands of manuscripts. It follows the events in Genesis and Exodus, exploring in more detail many stories, while expounding on major events such as the fallen angels, giants, the origin of demons, and much more. Most importantly, it prophesies about a generation that will return to the old paths in the last days to keep the commandments and laws. Join us as we test this great book line by line and see what was hidden to be revealed in our time, the Book of Jubilees. And welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Parable of the Vineyard weekly gathering. My name is Adam Fink, your host, and tonight is part 3 of our Jubilees reading, study, and commentary. If you're watching this as a recording, I would recommend it starting back at part 1, but not necessary. For those joining us live, welcome. It's good to study together with you. And for those joining us again or for another time, welcome back. We have a special guest tonight, Sean Griffin with Kingdom in Context. Welcome, brother.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
Yeah, welcome,
excited.
brother.
Jubilees is one of my favorite books.
Exactly. That's why it's really good to have you on. Sean is very knowledgeable with Jubilees, so really excited for him to join. For those of you that know, I liken Sean's knowledge to Jubilees as I do with myself with 2nd Ezra. 2nd Ezra is my favorite book. Jubilees is Sean's favorite book, so he's got a lot to bring to the table tonight. So no pressure, Sean. But just to review, in part 2, we read chapters 4 through 6, and we studied many topics: the death and burial of Adam, the fallen angels, the giants, Noah, a big importance on not eating blood, which we'll also touch again on tonight, as well as some key verses and implications for other things. But tonight we'll be reading through and studying chapters 7 through 9. We will see a giving of the law to Noah's 3 sons, more emphasis on staying away from eating blood, the division of the land, and actually a lot more. So quite a bit to go over tonight. So Sean, let's, if you don't mind, I'm going to open us up with a little bit of prayer, and then maybe later on you can close us out with some prayer, and we're going to get right into it because we have a lot to read and discuss tonight. So Heavenly Father, Most High, YHWH, we just come before you in Yahushua's name, and we're most thankful for him, your word, which is a lamp to our feet in these dark times. And we obviously thank you so much for his sacrifice for us to redeem us back to you and to bring us back to you. We thank you for the ability to gather like this all throughout your world, and we just pray that you open our eyes and ears to your word and understanding. That way we can all grow together, be prepared for Yahushua's return. In his name we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we're going to start with Jubilees 7, and I'm going to go ahead and get this screen share up. Give me just a moment. And so, Sean, what we're gonna do is, instead of like reading and stopping at every couple verses, what we'll do is we'll try to read maybe about half of the chapter and then kind of stop and then reflect on what we've read. And then move on. So it looks like in chapter 7 we've got 39 verses. So we'll stop at either 19 or 20, see how that goes, and then we'll stop and talk about different parts. So if you don't, and so we'll just take turns. Actually, we'll see if you're able to read off my screen share. If not, you've got the CEPHER handy, right?
I do. I have one in front of me.
Okay, excellent. And for those of you that want to read along, if you've got your CEPHER, we're going to be reading from the CEPHER version tonight. And thank you to Dr. Pigeon for allowing us to screen share these, to host these on the website. And thanks to Dave Courier for helping me with the website to get them up there. So thank you very much. All right, so let's... All right, so here we are, chapter 7, Book of Jubilees. Sean, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'll stop again like around verse 19 or 20. Okay, Jubilees chapter 7. And in the 7th week, in the first year thereof, in this Jubilee, Noach planted vines on the mountain on which the ark had rested, named Lubar, one of the Ararat mountains. And they produced fruit in the 4th year, and he did guard their fruit, and gathered it in this year in the 7th month. And he made wine therefrom, and put it into a vessel, and kept it until the 5th year, until the 1st day on the new moon of the 1st month. And he celebrated with joy the day of this feast, and he made a burnt sacrifice unto Yahuwah, 1 young ox and 1 ram, and 7 sheep, each a year old, and a kid of the goats, that he might make atonement thereby for himself and his sons. And he prepared the kid first, and placed some of its blood on the flesh that was on the altar which he had made, and all the fat he laid on the altar where he made the burnt sacrifice, and the ox and the ram and the sheep, and he laid all their flesh upon the altar. And he placed all their offerings mingled with oil upon it, and afterwards he sprinkled wine on the fire which he had previously made on the altar, and he placed incense on the altar, and caused a sweet savor to ascend acceptable before Yahuwah Eloheinu. Verse 6. And he rejoiced and drank of this wine, and his children with joy. And it was evening, and when he went into his tent, and being drunken, he lay down and slept, and was uncovered in his tent as he slept. And Ham and Noach his father, and Ham saw Noach his father naked, and went forth and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem took his garments and arose, he and Japheth, this is Japheth of course, and they placed the garment on their shoulders, and went backwards, and covered their shame of their father, and their faces were backward. And Noach awoke from his sleep, and knew all that his younger son had done unto him. And he cursed his son, and said, Cursed be Canaan, and enslaved servant shall he be unto his brethren. And he blessed Shem, and said, Blessed be Yahuwah Elohim of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, and Elohim shall dwell in the dwelling of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Ham knew that his father had cursed his younger son, and he was displeased that he had cursed his son. And he parted from his father, he and his sons with him, Cush, Mitzrayim, and Put, and Canaan. And he built for himself a city, and called its name after the name of his woman, Na-el-Atamauk. And Japheth saw it, and became envious of his brothers. And he too built for himself a city, and called its name after the name of his woman, Adantaneses. And Shem dwelt with his father Noach, and he built a city close to his father on the mountain, and he too called its name after the name of his woman, Sedekeletevav. And behold, these 3 cities are near Mount Lubar, Sedekeletevav, fronting the mountain on its east, and Nael Ta'amauk on the south, and Adantaneses towards the west. I should have had you read the first part, Sean. I'm just kidding. And these 3, and these are the sons of Shem, Elam, and Ashur, and Arphaxad. This son was born 2 years after the flood, and Ludi, and Aram. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yavan, Tubal, Meshech, and Therak. These are the sons of Noach. And we'll stop there because there's a lot to go over there. So I'll let you go first, Sean.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, those are some fun names, aren't they?
Yeah, that's why I was like, man, I should have gave you the first part. Let you handle those now. I'm just kidding.
Those are rough. The first thing that I am just amazed by is how much of the Torah that we can find these patriarchs performing. It's truly it's just beautiful to me. So in the first 6 verses where Noah is celebrating this feast of this new moon festival, which I'm going to ask your opinion on that new moon festival itself. I'm going to ask your opinion on that after this, but this first 6 verses, I mean, he's following as far as this wine that he has to prepare. He plants the vineyard, and then he harvests it in the 4th year. He guards the fruit, then gathers it in the 7th month, and then waits till the 5th month to actually use it. And then he uses it for this sacrifice. Well, this is Leviticus 19, verses 23 through 25. And so it's just such a beautiful example. I mean, to the letter, as far as the instruction goes, as far as this 4th year that he harvested this fruit of the vine, it's now holy to the Lord. And Adam, you and I know that term means set apart, right? It's set apart for the use of the sacrifice. And he uses it specifically for the sacrifice of this new moon festival of the first month, which is really awesome. So
It
he's
is.
following Torah.
It is, and I actually got Leviticus 19 pulled up. Let's just read it real quick so you can see that it's the exact same stuff. And when ye shall come into the land, and shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then ye shall count the fruit thereof as uncircumcised. 3 years shall it be as uncircumcised unto you. It shall not be eaten of. But in the 4th year all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise Yahuwah withal. And here we go. This is what we saw with Noah. And in the 5th year shall ye eat the fruit thereof, that it may yield unto you the increase thereof. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. So yeah, like Sean said, you're right. When we're actually going to continue to see it in this chapter, that we see Torah here, and I'm not going to steal any thunder, but we'll actually see that Noah gives it to his children, and therefore there's no excuses for the whole world. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But
yeah, I know a lot of people can already kind of reverse engineer, if you will, kind of look into the story of Enoch and how the first few chapters of Enoch talked about the lawlessness that was transpiring, and in chapter 4, and most people already come to a basic conclusion that because there's lawlessness and there's great chaos and destruction leading up to the flood, that means there had to have been some sort of instructions for living, some sort of Torah. And that's just what Torah means, right? Is instructions. So and of course you have Enoch being called a prophet. That's strongly associated with Torah, right? Because he's someone that's the mouthpiece of the Father, who's telling people what the rules are, so and helping them, encourage them to get back to the rules if they've gone astray. And then of course Noah already know, as you guys already discussed, last week, Noah, he already knows what clean and unclean means. So he didn't have Leviticus 11 or Deuteronomy 14 before he went on the boat. So how did he know? Well, Enoch had already taught him what Torah is.
Right.
And this is actually laid out. I believe it's in Enoch. I think it's in Enoch chapter 89. So it's already laid out that he taught Methuselah, and he told Methuselah to teach all these things that he learned and all these Torahs. And I personally think that we see examples of Adam already doing this with Cain and Abel.
Right.
Back in Genesis 4. So it's not really, because they were bringing literally a tithe of the first fruit, which is a tithe. So,
right.
So that when you go into Numbers 18 and you look at the order of events that were to go along with that tithe, that means that if Adam was the high priest in that moment, he would be eating of that tithe that was brought forth. So that's right. They've had Torah since the beginning.
Since the very beginning. And, when we went through the first book of Adam and Eve months ago, we saw similar things. We saw these sacrifices, and therefore we see them continue on. And like we saw here, actually, I'm gonna go back to the screen share. We see that Noah clearly knows how to do a sacrifice. He's got the right animals. He knows how to separate separate things, and he knows how to do these things. So obviously it was passed down somewhere. So as we're at this whole chapter, you're right, is actually I didn't even think about it here at the beginning, but towards the end we see a huge confirmation of the Book of Enoch. But really, you're right. If you kind of back into it, you're absolutely right. That's the only way these things were passed down, was through the writings of Enoch, because it said that he was the first one that learned how to write. So anyways.
Also, just the fact that I like what you said, that he knows how to do a sacrifice. So since there's no tabernacle of tent of meeting that was given to them to build at this time, then that means that the altar that he's making here is one of unhewn stone.
Right.
From the instructions for Torah. So I like it.
Right. And again, it goes back to the same thing we saw in first book of Adam and Eve. It was unhewn stone that they kind of just put together. So, that tradition continued. So, yeah. And, another thing I really want to point out here is, in this movement of Torah, whatever you want to call it, people have different names for it, Hebrew roots, but all these names, it's like hard to associate with everybody in that movement, because there's, even in this small little movement, there's still so many different personalities and understandings and teachings. And honestly, there's Torah terrorism. There's still the spirit of Pharisees. Although mainstream Christianity likes to look at us as Pharisees because we not only have faith but like to walk in the Most High's eternal law, Torah. But I've seen this time and time again. Torah teachers are talking about not drinking any wine, abstaining from all wine whatsoever. that wine is a sin and whatnot, and we know that is just it. It is not scriptural, and that's based off of interpretation. And drinking of wine is not a bad thing, especially considering Passover and the drinking of wine. And before we judge Noah here, drinking of the first time, the first fruits of this wine that he's been waiting for 5 years, because there's been no wine on the earth, right? Because everything was destroyed, unless he took some with him. But I don't know if he did or not. But this is the first time he got to drink. Any of his sons got to drink in 5 years, and so he got a little tipsy. There's a difference between happening once or once in a while, as opposed to a person that is in perpetual drunkenness. And I could tell you guys know that I've been very transparent with you. My old life, I used to drink way too much, so I could tell you I know there's a difference between someone that drinks occasionally and someone that drinks. If you know what I mean. But my overall point was, it is not a sin to drink wine. In the Proverbs, it says the wine was made to make the heart of man merry. So anyways, just wanted to point that out, because there is a lot of stumbling blocks in this movement.
Well, we actually want a verse for this idea of drinking wine, I love Deuteronomy 14, because 14:26, it directly tells you, if you take your tithe to Jerusalem and you want to use it, then it says in verse 26, you shall bestow that money for whatsoever your soul lusts after, for oxen, sheep, wine, or strong drink, whatever your soul desires.
Right, exactly. And, it's funny that it comes up tonight, but, that's going to be part of tonight's Torah portion. So for those of you that are late nighters, after this stream ends, I usually take about a 10-minute break. We'll be doing the Torah portion tonight, which is week 47, Deuteronomy 11:26 through 16:11, I think, or something, somewhere around there. But yeah, so 14 is included tonight. So that's actually what I'm going to be talking about, is where did that come from, right? He's like, hey, if you want liquor, get liquor, right? And you're like, whoa, okay, what's going on there, right? But still, obviously, we still need to be chaste individuals and have the ability to have discernment of when too much is too much, and those kind of things. So anyways, great point.
Yeah, you remember in Leviticus 9 where Nadab and Abihu, right, they came forward with the strange fire, and if you look closely, it looks like they were drunk.
I've heard that. I've heard that before, and that's an interesting point.
And that's where it started, this instruction for all the priests that come before the Lord. They cannot be drunk when they do that. So it doesn't say don't ever drink wine. It just says make sure you're not drunk when you're coming to do your duties before the Lord, So
Makes
it's
sense.
interesting. But of course, we have stuff like Proverbs 23:20, I believe, telling us not to excess in too much wine, right? In moderation.
Right. So, and last but not least, even Paul says, have a little wine for thy stomach's sake, So, anyways.
But Adam, I'm curious to see, what do you think? Because I know last week you went through chapter 6, right? So you went through all over the 4 different feasts that Noah created, if I could put it like that. Like he kind of ordained them himself, as it says. And that was back in Jubilees 6:24 and 25. So do you think that these new moon feasts, do you think these are the same thing as the first of the month instruction in Numbers 28?
I do, actually. And that's something that I was talking to Zach Struhurick, which, he's very keen on the Zadok calendar. And basically, and this is, I'm kind of going to go a little off topic, but basically where he's coming from is he believes the new moon is actually head of the month. Rosh Chodesh, instead of, we know that the translators took a lot of liberties with the Masoretic and the King James and whatnot, and he feels that a lot of those same liberties were taken with the translation of Jubilees and whatnot. But yeah, at the end of the day, I kind of do think that they are one and the same. And you're actually having Zach on soon, aren't you? Or is that supposed to be a secret? Uh-oh.
No, it's all right. Okay. No, we're just talking about trying to find a time. Because I'm interested to study the calendar too.
I am too.
He's talking about, and he seems to put some work into it. So I'd love to pick his brain, and because that's just like you said, I think a couple weeks ago maybe, but I've just been studying other stuff. There's so much stuff to study.
There is, and that's certainly, and we've just been called different things, and Zach has been called that, and it's like, man, all right, you put the time in. Let's talk about this, because every time I told him last week when I was going over chapter 6 is like, I really want to help. I really want to help, show you guys the right calendar, but I don't know. I don't know. And every time I've sat down, I feel like there's been a block, and it's like, nope, you're supposed to be studying something else. Like, okay, all right, fine, fair enough. So,
Well, if hand, all of us are hands and feet, right? Someone's a hand, someone's a
right,
foot. So who knows? We're maybe different people that present the word or led to study different things, and we should all come together.
right. I agree. All right, so let's move on. We'll get to verse 20. Do you want to pick up at verse 20?
Sure. Verse 20. Oh, did you want to mention? Did you want to talk about some of the things in verse 7 through 13?
So
Just with Ham, because the big stigma about Ham and how
oh,
people think
there's there is this notion that people think that Ham may have slept with his mother, because there's a verse, I forgot what chapter and verse it was, but there's a verse that says, seeing your mother naked is like seeing under your father's skirt, but also
Leviticus 18.
Okay, but sleeping with your mother is kind of a similar terminology to his father's nakedness, right? So, but I don't know how you feel about this, but I really feel that he just saw his father just like laid out naked in his tent. I feel like that's the extent of it.
I agree with you, and I think and the reason why I hope the viewer is noticing this as well, because when we get to verses 20 through 25, it's actually going to be reasoning for why Noah says some of the stuff he says to his sons and grandsons. But ultimately, I mean, even if since we already know that Noah's following Torah, and since that's what we were building up to, there's some serious issues in Torah if that theory that people try to promote is correct, and the biggest one being that both Ham and his mother would have been killed that day before sundown, if that truly was what happened. And the text itself doesn't say that's what happened. And a lot of people, because there's so much limited information in Genesis 9, they use the limited description here to assume that somehow Canaan, the son of Ham, was a byproduct of this violation. But that's just under the theory that Ham actually violated his own mom, and that's not really at all what happened.
Right.
Because, I mean, again, I like to remind people that Genesis itself doesn't have any trouble telling us what happened with Reuben and Bilhah, where Reuben did that with one of his wives.
And we see Jacob separate from Bilhah and never be with her again, and we don't really see that with Noah here. So
yeah, and Jubilees itself goes over that story as well. And it tells you why Reuben wasn't killed. And that was actually unique. It's in Jubilees 33. I know you're not there yet, so like we won't go into much depth because I'll wait till you get there in a few weeks. But there's an actually angel that explains to Moses, this is why Reuben wasn't killed that day. And there's a unique reason, which I think is really interesting, has an interesting implications. But this basically, the language and the comparison of stories, I don't think Ham did anything to his mother. I think it shows the irreverence of his heart towards Torah. And then we're going to see how that unfolds in the following chapters when it comes to Canaan.
Right, right.
So that's
in just last thing before we move on. Speaking of Reuben and Bilhah, if the testament of 12 patriarchs is legitimate, which I know they found Naphtali and Levi, I think, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but not the others. But in the testament of Reuben, I mean, we see a deep repentance that we don't see in the canon. I mean, we're talking about just deep repentance. I mean, he didn't eat any pleasant thing for like 7 years, I think. And Jacob pleaded on his behalf, or else he would have been killed also. So just a couple different things. So yeah, really interesting story there if you guys want to research that a little further. But the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, just amazing read, and I pray that they're true because there's amazing stuff in there.
Hey, Adam, did you know that the Testament of 12 Patriarchs as a whole, not just the 2 books found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but as a whole, like the manuscripts that were preserved, the whole thing was put in the Armenian canon in the 1600s.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, is that and that's where we get the other books from? The other 10? Yeah. Okay, awesome.
So the copies were found of Naphtali and Levi, but they already had these other ones that they come about, and they were already collected as a whole and were put in that Orthodox canon overseas, but it didn't go into the American King James canon. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. I'm gonna tuck that one away. All right. So verse 20, if you're ready.
I'm ready. Okay. So here in verse 20, and in the 20th Jubilee, Noach began to enjoin upon his son's sons the ordinances and commandments and all the judgments that he knew. And he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness, to cover the shame of their flesh, and to bless their Creator and honor father and mother, and love their neighbor, and guard their souls from fornication and uncleanness and all iniquity. For owing to these three things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication, wherein the watchers against the Torah of their ordinances went a-whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves women of all which they chose. And they made the beginning of uncleanness, and they begat sons of the Nephilim, and they were all unlike. They devoured one another, and the giants slew the Nephiel, and the Nephiel slew the Elio, and the Elio mankind, and one man another. And everyone sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts and the birds, and all that moves and walks on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth. And every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. And Yahuwah destroyed everything from off the face of the earth, because of the wickedness of their deeds, and because of the blood which they had shed in the midst of the earth, he destroyed everything. And we were left, I and you, my sons, and everything that entered with us into the ark. And behold, I see your works before me, that you do not walk in righteousness. For in the path of destruction ye have begun to walk, and ye are parting one from another, and are envious one of another. And so it comes that you are not in harmony, my sons, each with his brother. For I see and behold, the devils have begun their seductions against you and against your children. And now I fear in your behalf, that after my death you will shed much blood of men upon the earth, and that ye too will be destroyed from the face of the earth. For whosoever sheds man's blood, and whoso eats the blood of any flesh, shall all be destroyed from the earth. And there shall not be left any man that eats blood, or that sheds the blood of man on the earth, nor shall there be left to him any seed or descendants living under heaven. For into Sheol shall they go, into the place of condemnation shall they descend, and into the darkness of the deep shall they all be removed by a violent death. There shall no blood be seen upon you. Of all the blood there shall be all the days in which ye have killed beasts or cattle or whatsoever flies upon the earth. And work ye a good work to your souls, by covering that which has been shed on the face of the earth. Do you want me to stop there?
Yeah, I guess because there is quite a bit to go over right there. So, okay, so we stopped at 30, so we'll resume at 31. If you don't mind, I'll talk about just verse 20 real quick. I mean, verse 20 just really says a lot to me. And, it's something we really don't see in the canon, and that's why I just love digging into these books, the extra book. I hate calling them the extra books because they're not really extra. They were just hidden. And again, for those of you that follow this channel for a while, they were hidden on purpose. To Esdras chapter 14 tells us that the Most High said these books, certain books are going to be public, certain books are going to be kept private. And I do believe that we're in these end times. These private books have been manifested to us openly. And those who want to read them, and those who don't want to read them, don't read them. But point being is, in verse 20, we see here that Noah, it says Noah began to enjoin upon his sons the ordinances and commandments and all the judgments, right? So he was teaching them the law, right? Whether it was the fullness of exactly what it was spoken to Israel on Mount Sinai or given to Moses, I don't know. But there's definitely a lot of the same things we're seeing. It's not a different law, let me just say that. What really brings to mind is, people want to, they want to put this on the Most High and say, he only just has favor over these one people, and he didn't get, what about people in Thailand? They never heard the good news. They never heard the law. Well, these are all the descendants of these sons. There was 3 sons. There was Japheth, there was Ham and Shem. They spread out and became all these people that we are today. So my point is, I want to just read a little bit from Second Esdras. You guys know it's my favorite book, so I'm always going to find tie-ins with Second Esdras. But read this. This really puts things into perspective. 2 Esdras 7:17 through 25. Then he answered and said, O sovereign Lord, behold, thou hast ordained in thy law that the righteous shall inherit these things, but that the ungodly shall perish. The righteous, therefore, can endure difficult circumstances while hoping for easier ones, but those who have done wickedly have suffered the difficult circumstances and will not see either easier ones. So I love Ezra's heart, right? He's even worried about the wicked. And he said to me, this is the angel Uriel responding to him, you are not a better judge than God, or wiser than the Most High. Let many perish who are now living, rather than the law of God, which is set before them, be disregarded. For God strictly commanded those who came into the world, when they came, what they should do to live, and what they should observe to avoid punishment. Nevertheless, they were not obedient and spoke against him. They devised for themselves vain thoughts and proposed to themselves wicked frauds. They even declared that the Most High does not exist, and they ignored his ways, and they scorned his laws, and denied his covenants. They have been unfaithful to his statutes, and have not performed his works. Therefore, Ezra, empty things are for the empty, and full things are for the full. So this really ties in my opinion, to what we're seeing here in Jubilees. We're seeing that Noah gave all his descendants the law, and it was them who despised his ways. They declared he didn't exist, right? Because they started serving, Elohim of wood and of stone, and obviously what Nimrod brought forth. But there is no excuse. There is no excuse. Everybody, every race, every skin color was given the law, right? And so, anyways, my point is to show that the Most High was equal. He gave everybody an opportunity to follow his laws and ways, but they decided to go different ways. And we know it was the line of Shem through Abraham and whatnot that continued on this thing. And now, of course, it doesn't matter where you're from, because we're all brought into Israel by belief in Messiah Yahusha. But again, I'm kind of doing a little, not that the Most High needs me to do some apologetics for him, but it's all there, right? It's all there. And I'll be quiet.
No, you're great, brother. You brought up an amazing thing that a lot of people in regular church have asked, try to get answers from pastors about how are people judged all across the world before Christ came. All the people that lived and died. And as we're seeing here, Noah did, enjoin upon his sons, which is a word that just means to urgently direct them or command them. So, and this is what I was saying earlier about he's seen, he gets off the boat, they're doing the celebration. He's seen what's going on with Ham, who, by the way, Ham, when he didn't cover his father's nakedness, that's one of the commands that he just enjoined upon his sons and grandsons, is that you cover the shame of your flesh. And he didn't honor his father, which is another command he just enjoined upon his sons. And whereas Shem and Japheth didn't look at his shame, and they honored their father and covered him up, right, while he was in a vulnerable position. And so we're seeing Ham is obviously not, he doesn't have a heart for Torah at this point. So it makes perfect sense to me that Noah suddenly starts making a speech to everybody, trying to, urgently remind them, hey guys, we've got to keep with righteousness, because we just got off the boat. We just went through all this. Come on now. Let's not fall back into this. But we're going to see in chapter 8 that unfortunately that instruction is not followed. But the thing that you brought up is so amazing, brother, because so many people struggle with this. I myself struggled with this growing up. This idea of all these people that flourished after the flood, before Christ came, for 2,000 years. How, when they died, how are they judged?
Right. It's a fair question.
Well, I don't know if I do a series on my channel called Torah Apologetics, and I actually try to address that from the Torah, and it's pretty amazing, brother. If you go to Matthew 25, when he's judging the sheep, the people that he doesn't destroy, but he saves, and he says, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. That's Deuteronomy 10:18. And then he says, I was a stranger, you invited me in. That's Exodus 22, verses 21 through 24. He says, I was naked, you clothed me. That's Deuteronomy 10:18 also. And then he said, I was sick, you visited me, and I was in prison, you came to see me. That's also in Deuteronomy 10:19. So essentially what I'm saying is he's judging these people that say, when did we do this stuff for you, right? Because he's like, well, to my brethren, you did these to the least of them, you did it to me. So he's using the standard of Torah to judge people that don't know him. Yeah. And didn't interact with him. He's using the standard of Torah because, of course, he is the Word made flesh. He's the law embodied perfectly. But I just think it's beautiful that it would make perfect sense as not just as a testimony, but as a witness against all mankind. Is right when you get off the boat, Noah's telling everybody that's alive, hey, here's the rules. And I agree with you 100% that they didn't have the fullness of what we see on Mount Sinai because they weren't getting instructions for the tabernacle and all the different instructions that went with that and for the priesthood and everything. But they did have a priest, that's Noah, doing sacrifices. They did have enough laws for, obey behavior and festivals and things like that. So they had a lot of instruction. They had a lot of Torah. They just didn't have every single detail we find in Exodus through Leviticus. Right. Is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
I agree. And of course, chapters 21 through 25, I mean, this is honestly all of this can be summed up, as in the days of Noah, and it's this is very important stuff. Real quick, Revelation 3:3. This is from Yeshua. It says, "Remember therefore how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come upon thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I come upon thee." So this is a direct command for Yeshua to tell us to watch, right? And why do we need to watch? Because right here, Matthew 24:37, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." And if you don't mind, Sean, I'm just going to kind of just read through this real quick. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And let me let's see. I'll just skip real quick. "So watch therefore, for you know not what hour Yahushua doth come. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would have not suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods." And right here, this is what I see a lot going on right here. This is why I actually wanted to read this. If that evil servant shall say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what am I getting at? So we need to be looking of what's going on in the days of Noah, right? And we see the mixing of the DNA, right? They sinned against birds and beasts and everything that moves and walks on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth. And honestly, we're getting to a point in every imagination and desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. Does it not? I mean, that's kind of. I'm sorry, I thought I was screen sharing. Does it not? Because, I mean, we're at a point where, I mean, almost anything's okay. I mean, they're dipping their toes and bringing out pedophilia out in the open, and cannibalism is in mainstream media, which we're going to see a lot of emphasis on not eating the blood and the implications it brings. But the book of Jasher, and I know that we're both a little reserved on Jasher. I think we both want it to be true. And here's a good reason why I'm a little leery. Here's chapter 4, verse 18. And instead of saying, the angels, it says their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men, right? Instead of the angels. But it says right here, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with another, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw all the whole earth, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on the earth. So that's the kind of stuff that was happening in Noah's days, and and we're seeing it today. We're seeing the very same things with the mixing, the chimeras, the EnviroPig, and which is really interesting. Sean, have you looked into the EnviroPig at all? Have you
Not
heard
the
about it?
EnviroPig, but I've looked at other forms of chimera hybridization with genetic splicing, and it's scary stuff, man. Scary stuff.
It is. Well, the EnviroPig reminds me of Isaiah 66, is it 15, where he talks about they that sanctify themselves in the garden behind a tree, eating the abomination, the swine's flesh, and the mouse. Well, it's interesting. I think it's Isaiah 66:15, but you know what I'm talking about. But what's interesting, it talks about eating the swine and the mouse, and the EnviroPig is a splice between the pig and the mouse. So I just thought that was pretty wild.
Wow.
But we're seeing the mixture here, and I think somewhere else in Jasher, this is kind of wild, but I think somewhere else in Jasher, it talks about like these half man, half like horse beings and other things. It's just crazy. But so who knows what the powers that be are doing right now with the CRISPR technology, and that's got to be an abomination in this eyes of Yahuwah. Of course, they present it as this great thing. Hey, we can cure cancer, we can cure childhood diseases, we can cure all this kind of stuff. So face value, they sell it as this bright and shiny thing, but at the core of it, what is it? It's an abomination. It's trying to be God, is it not? Just like the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's taken all of creation into their hands, manipulating for what Enoch would call sorcery. I mean, this is part of the wickedness that they taught mankind before the flood. So, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me, this is what Isaiah 47 is mentioning when it talks about when it's chastising Babylon, and it's speaking about how you've practiced sorcery since your youth. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, we know Nimrod, king of Babylon, Tower of Babel, all the way back to few hundred years after the flood. So yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It's hey, do you remember the verse in Jubilees? I'm trying to look for it right now as we're talking, but because you read from Jasher, and brother, yeah, like you probably know, I'm kind of reserved on Jasher.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that watches my channel, I don't read from it a lot because I'm still testing it in some ways. And so that passage you read from Jasher though is one that I think that we can find justification for, because there's a passage here in Jubilees where it says your watchers that you sent.
Right.
See, and this is the part that I think people miss when they're reading the Book of
That's
Enoch,
right. That's right.
is that
Actually.
the judges and the rulers would have been, because remember the angels are in authority over mankind. That's they're the ministering angels sent out to help mankind, and they're in the authority of the Father. So when they show up, you treat them like a ruler or a judge, because they're whatever they say happens.
True. I was blown away by that. I only read Jubilees about 2 or 3 times before I got into this study to prepare for this series. And when I read that this time around, it's like I had never seen it before, and it's the only place you can find it. What Sean is alluding to is it actually says that the Most High sent the 200 watchers that we see in the Book of Enoch that mated with women. They were actually sent to instruct mankind of righteousness. So yeah, right. Actually, you're right. I didn't put that two and two together about in Jasher chapter 4 about the judges and rulers. But you're right. The watchers were supposed to be the judges and rulers of righteousness, and they ended up being the judges and rulers of wickedness.
That's right.
So yeah, good call. And I don't think we're going to talk about that tonight. I think that's in chapter 10 or 11. I think so. Maybe next week we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to find it in chapter 10, but Noah definitely brings up the watchers again in chapter 10 in regards to the unclean spirits, which is something we just read about here in this chapter, in chapter 7 and verse 27, where it mentions the demons, how already began their seduction against Noah's
Mm-hmm.
sons and grandsons.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a unique point of fact, because like you've got the mention of the Eloi, the Nephilim, and all that stuff, but it doesn't tell you who the demons are and where they came from until you get to chapter 10. So it's already mentioning a term that it kind of expects you to already know. Or had you read the Book of Enoch, you would have absolutely known.
Right. Right, because I think it says that since there was no habitation made for them, and because they were the offspring of the angel and man, that they would wander and torment.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. Anyways. Yeah.
And Enoch 15. So like it kind of assumes you know what a demon is before it really explains to you what a demon is in chapter
Right.
10. So that's, to me, I just love all these little things that always point back to Enoch.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. Like I was saying, this at the outset, this chapter really confirms Enoch on so many different levels. And here we go. Here's another one. And with the seduction of demons, this is what's going on today. You've got this seducing spirit that's sent out over the earth. Whether those angels that were bound for 70 generations have come back and they're also helping to lead man astray, or really, I mean, honestly, lead man towards the end times, because we see that this whole plan, Revelation 17:17 says, when it talks about the beast and his 10 kingdoms and all that kind of stuff, that their whole plan was put into their mind by the Most High, right? And we see that time and time again. People, it's a hard concept for people to really take hold of. Last week we actually read in Isaiah 10 that Assyria, was the rod of his indignation, right? So it's like he raised up Assyria to go take over the northern kingdom, and he raised Nebuchadnezzar to eventually take over the southern kingdom and whatnot. And anyway, so all this is the Most High's plan. We can't think that anything got by him, or he didn't foresee everything, because we knew that he knew the end from the beginning. So just another testimony to his absolute authority over everything. But
Yeah, you also read in this chapter in 28 through 33, you were talking about this idea of blood, of cannibalism, which is something that we saw before the flood in Enoch. But we're also seeing Noah tell his sons, "Don't eat blood," and that's actually part of this covenant we see in Genesis 9. That he was trying to tell Noah, like, this is very important. Do not eat blood. And we see it, of course, repeated here. And this is straight from Leviticus 17:10 through 14. Like, this is Torah, absolutely 100%. And because this idea of eating blood was a kind of a practice of the pagan world, right? They thought they gained power by it. It became a part of the occultic rituals.
Let me ask you a question, and this is something that I am personally not, I don't have settled in my mind. It's like literally straight down the middle. Some people believe this and some people believe that. But as far as not eating the blood, some people believe that when we go out to the store and get a steak and there's that red juicy stuff, some people say that is traces of blood and that you need to cook it all out. Some people say that no, it's some sort of reaction that happens to the meat after so long. I'm really right. I really don't know. So I'm cautious and I just cook everything. What's your opinion on the matter?
This is actually a technical medical name for that, and it's not considered hemoglobin.
Okay.
It's something different. And so this is why at the slaughtering house they do the proper techniques, just like the Israelite priests were used to do during the sacrifice, to actually drain the blood from the body before they cooked it. So that way there was an actual time period where the blood would. That's why you had to do the right incision on the neck to hit the right vein or right artery and drain all the blood out of the animal, and then you could start preparing different pieces for different sacrifices. So that same concept has been adopted by modern day slaughterhouses, where they drain the animal before they actually start to dismember it and use and find those choice pieces. But the red stuff there's an actual technical medical name for it. I can't remember right now what it is, but it's not blood. So this is, yeah,
Okay.
I do believe in cooking my meat thoroughly, and not, just eating, raw meats, right? I do believe in that, but it's not like, again, this is the difference in the actual cultic practices that we see in Leviticus 18:2-20. That Enoch does reference this idea that they were not just the idea of eating blood, but they were drinking it as well. So it was a very dark practice that they did with their rituals.
I agree, and I'm gonna want to touch on this again here at the beginning of chapter 8 when we see Nimrod. I really believe that was part of it, and I'm actually going to be bringing up the Septuagint. Which, by the way, I don't want to get too far off topic because I know there's a ton of stuff we could talk about this. But I've been really thankful that you brought up the Septuagint and some of the things that are just missing out of the Masoretic. Well, I think we'll actually see a little snippet of that here in a little bit. I'm going to read from the Septuagint when we get to Nimrod, and it really, I think, tying in the blood and how he became a giant and all that kind of stuff. There's definitely something to it, and again, you see it in mainstream media. You see it like in. I'm not going to show you guys. I was originally going to pull up some images for you guys, but it's just too nasty. I don't even suggest looking into this. But it's in like music videos. It's like a person is like baked as like a cake, or a cake is made in the shape of a person, and they're eating it, and the insides are red, and they're enjoying it, and it's just so disgusting. And and like a lot of no topics, for lack of better words, like a lot of no topics, the media is very methodical. First, it's like first they bring it out as a shock factor, and everybody's like, oh, then it's ridiculed. Then it's laughed about, right? And then it's finally accepted. And we saw that with the LGBT community. We saw that with transgender. Same thing. Came out as like shock factor. Then it's ridiculed. Then it's laughed at. Then it's accepted. It's like kind of this process they go through to desensitize people and to then eventually, through media and through emotions. You have movies that bring emotions out, and you feel for people. And then you're like, oh, well, I guess it's not that bad. And slowly just take people away from the commandments of Yah in so many different ways, and of course with fornication and drunkenness and drugs and sexual immorality, it just all these different things, and cannibalism, blood is one of those things, and think about it. Think about the whole series with what's that vampire series with all those books and movies, the Twilight series. They've made a huge chunk of people fantasize about drinking blood and becoming a vampire, and so they're romanticizing it, and of course almost everything in media is the opposite of the Most High. And so again, there's just something about the blood, and it's fascinating. It's actually the very first video I made on this channel was about blood, because I started asking a lot of questions because I found out that I had A negative blood and that there was very rare, and I'm wondering why there's differences between negative blood and positive of blood, and it just got me on this long rabbit trail. But there's just something about the blood, and long story short, let's not touch it.
That's right.
Sorry, I went off on a
Actually,
tangent. Sorry.
no, you're fine, because I just saw a news report just like 2 weeks ago, apparently, of a modern pop star. I don't know her name, but she's popular, and she was literally drinking blood on stage during one of her concerts, in between songs for, I guess, shock value. So to me, it's like trying to desensitize people, like you said, through movies, media, TV, music, subliminal messages for years, for generations, so that it's no longer shocking whenever, if, in my opinion, the beast, when he actually is presented to the world and he says, hey, this is actually what I want people to do, or this is what I do, and this is how I gain my power. Because these are age-old practices taught by the Watchers to mankind from way before the flood, and they're straight up occultic.
Yeah, I had to Google it while you said it. Kesha was drinking blood on.
Yeah.
This is just disgusting. So yeah, I don't even want to show.
Oh,
it
by
to
the
you
way,
guys.
the name to that the redness in meat before you cook it's called oxymyoglobin. It's not hemoglobin.
Oxymyoglobin. Okay,
Yeah,
fair enough.
it's not actually blood.
Like I said, my warning is, hey, I think we should just cook it all out, anyways. But hey, to each his own. I'm no Pharisee that's gonna tell you what to do and not to do. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, and think about it, and as important of important law this was, we see the same thing in Acts 15, right? The same passage where people use those three or four, was it four things? Yeah, four things. They believe that's the whole of the law, but we see that's one of the four things where like all these new converts coming into the faith of Messiah, they're like, all right, what do we gotta establish some basic rules, right? And so they came, and one of them was you can't no blood. You can't partake in blood, right? And so that was one of the very foundational things that they had to stop before they can enter into the synagogues and learn from the law of Moses each Sabbath day. Verse 21, which a lot of modern day pastors and theologians like to skip, but verse 21 is the climax that leads up. Everything leads up to that. Like, what do we get to these people to a point where they can come and learn on the Sabbath with us each week and to grow in their walk? But we see that again in Acts 15, which really shows the huge importance of it.
Yeah, these things that are mentioned in Acts 15, those four things, they're straight Torah, by the way. And I think a lot of modern churches that try to say, oh, well, these are just some basic things that they told them, but then, because originally the conversation started about circumcision, and they were trying to figure out, whether or not you're saved if you're circumcised or not, and they're arguing about this, and Paul and Barnabas bring it forth to James and Peter and everybody. But then these things that are listed off, the abstaining from things contaminated by idols, the fornication, what's strangled, and from blood, those four qualifiers are straight up from Torah, from Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and different chapters. And like you said, they assumed they would learn the rest when they heard from Moses being read every Sabbath in the synagogues. Mm-hmm. But from my estimation, from studying the Torah, the reason why they would want to use those four things first, like you get a brand new convert who has been practicing at the pagan temples, Satanism, basically. I mean, that's the general term, but that's what all these idolatrous practices were. And for them to actually want to come and maybe, who knows, maybe feast was nearby, like Feast of Tabernacles, or maybe the Feast of Shavuot was nearby, and they wanted to participate, right, in the Lord's feasts with them. So they had to be clean, and you can't be going to getting yourself unclean and at these temples where they did all these ridiculous practices. And if people want to know like what kind of practices they did at these shrines to the pagan gods, go read Leviticus 18 through 20, because it just lists them all out. That's what it was listing out, was all the behaviors of the nations and how they worship these idols. And it's horrible stuff. It's horrible stuff. So like, yeah, that's why you would want them to stop doing those things immediately if you say you're a convert to Yeshua, and then we're going to teach you the rest. So,
amen. And lastly, and for sake of time, we should probably move on. It still goes on today. I mean, we saw that Alex Jones leak video from years ago about the Bohemian Grove, and they were still doing like the mock sacrifices, and they had that huge idol, and I'm sure they're all drinking blood. There's just something about it that's like the basics is like drinking blood. And anyways, so
yeah, that big owl that they do that Bohemian Grove ceremony.
Is it Molech or Moloch or
Molech.
Yeah.
A lot of people argue about that particular idol god Molech, whether he was represented by a big bull or by an owl. But if you look through history, he's represented by both,
Mm-hmm.
and he's actually layered everywhere, like in a lot of things in the government. And he's actually on the dollar bill.
Yeah, that
He's
little.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's actually an altar in the UN meditation room
Mm-hmm.
in the building of the UN, and there's a painting on the wall that is a artistic painting of Molech. And so, like, I saw this painting in this room because there's this big stone altar in this room, and it's called the meditation room. And so I took that picture of that looks like nothing. It looks like abstract art, but if you reverse the image back on itself, it makes an owl.
I want to show this to everybody. I know what you're talking about. What meditation room? Where's it at again? The UN? Is it? Where's it at?
The
The
UN meditation room. Yeah.
Meditation Room, United Nations. Okay, let me pull this up. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Let me pull up a big one. Hold on. And share.
I know I can't screen share, but
Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
so that painting in the background there, if you actually screenshot that, lift it, and take the transparency to 50%, and then invert it, and you know what I'm talking about because you and I make images, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you screenshot that, take the transparency to halfway, invert it, and then lay it back on itself, it makes a perfect picture of an owl.
I want to see. I know somebody's done it before. I just don't want to scroll too fast.
I've got a video on my channel where
And,
I show people how to do it. It's interesting.
oh man, maybe I'll just type in. I just want to show real quick. Inverted. Yeah, well, that's okay. So you said you have a video on it.
Yeah, on my channel, I actually have a video where I show people where I do it, and it's pretty wild, man.
Okay.
Because it makes a perfect picture of an owl, and it's like a 3-minute video. It's not very long. And then I also just show some quick tie-ins with things throughout history as well as in our culture. That it's all Molech worship, all of it. So it's all just layered and hidden.
It is. It is. Sure is. Okay. So we left. I think we're at verse 30, right?
Yeah.
All right. You go ahead when you're ready.
You want me to keep going? Okay.
Yeah.
So here in verse 30, there shall be no blood seen upon you. Of all the blood there shall be all the days in which you've killed any beast or cattle or whatsoever flies upon the earth. And work ye a good work to your souls by covering that which has been shed on the face of the earth. And ye shall not be like him who eats with blood, but guard yourselves that none may eat blood before you. Cover the blood, for thus I have been commanded to testify to you and your children together with all flesh. And suffer not the soul to be eaten with the flesh, that your blood, which is your life, may not be required at the hand of any flesh that sheds it on the earth. For the earth will not be clean from the blood which has been shed upon it. For only through the blood of him that shed it will the earth be purified throughout all its generations. And now, my children, hearken, work judgment and righteousness, that ye may be planted in righteousness over the face of the whole earth, and your glory lifted up before my Elohim, who saved me from the waters of the flood. And behold, ye will go and build yourself cities, and plant in them all the plants that are upon the earth, and moreover all fruit-bearing trees. For 3 years the fruit of everything that is eaten will not be gathered, and in the 4th year its fruit will be counted holy, and they will offer the first fruits, acceptable before El Elyon, who created heaven and earth and all things. Let them offer in abundance the first of the wine and oil as firstfruits of the altar of Yahuwah, who receives it. And what is left, let the servants of the house of Yahuwah eat before the altar which receives it. And in the 5th year ye make ye release, so that ye release it in the righteousness and uprightness, and ye shall be righteous, and all that you plant shall prosper. For thus did Enoch, the father of your father, commanded Methuselah his son, and Methuselah his son Lamech. And Lamech commanded me all the things which his fathers commanded him. Then I also will give you commandment, my sons, as Enoch commanded his sons in the first Jubilees. While still living, the 7th in his generation, he commanded and testified to his sons and to his sons' sons until the day of his death.
Amen. And again, we're just continuing to see more and more confirmations that Enoch is a legitimate book. I think we all know that in the spirit when we read it, but here we have confirmation, and I really trust the fact that 15 copies of Jubilees was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, that tells you something. It was the sixth most amongst all the finds, and here it is, confirming the Book of Enoch, which I think is just so awesome. And it's very similar wording to what Jude wrote. In Enoch, the 7th from Adam prophesied. we see it here that it's making sure that we know which Enoch it is, and the seventh in his generation. And he commanded and testified to his sons until the day of his death. But we like we were talking about earlier, we see that it was passed down from Enoch to his son, and so on and so forth down to Noah. And then we of course Noah passed it on to all three sons, but mainly Shem, because Shem stuck around. And we do get that in Jubilees, or I'm sorry, in Jasher, where Shem stayed with and studied under Noah, and of course we see where Abraham studied under Noah, and things start to make so much sense of how all the patriarchs knew all these things. But
yeah, in the context of these last 4 or 5 verses from 35 to 39 is the beautiful part to me, because he's telling them about how to gather in the 4th year. It's counted as holy, and then he uses it for the first fruits. And we already talked about this, right? So he's instructing his sons Torah, which he already exemplified earlier in the chapter. And so he's practicing and he's teaching it, and then he goes on to tell them, these things were taught to my grandfather Methuselah, and then taught to my father Lamech, and then taught to me. So he's telling you a direct lineage of instruction that directly lets it back to Enoch. And what's beautiful about this, in my opinion, is that if you look here in verse, where was it? Here in verse 36, where he says, "The house of the Lord." Is that in this translation? Yeah, in verse 36. Let them offer in abundance the first of the wine and oil as first fruits in the altar of Yahuwah, who receives it. And what is left, let the servants of the house of Yahuwah eat before the altar which receives it. Well, where's this house? So what does Enoch prophesy in chapter 90? He prophesies 2 houses of God, of Yahuwah. One that is temporary, that gets destroyed, and another one that comes down out of heaven and lasts forever.
That's right.
So he's already, and of course, this instruction for what's left over to be eaten by the servants of the house, those are priests. Exodus 28:1, Aaron and his sons were made servants unto Yahuwah. These are the priests of the house of God, of his sanctuary, and they eat what's left over. In Numbers 18, they eat what's left over from this first fruits tithe. I mean, this is like, he's explaining Torah in like 5 different levels right here, and he's referencing back to something that he would not have had any knowledge of unless he read the Book of Enoch to know that there would be a house of the Lord in the future.
Amen. Good call.
Yeah, I love this book, man. And what's crazy is, like, in modern day scholarship, rabbinical scholars will say that this book is considered the lesser Genesis, and I don't know if that's true. I think, this has like so much more information than Genesis does, and it ties in some things. And you're gonna, as you continue reading through this in the following weeks, you're gonna start to see this stuff, because it gives you instructions about the feast days that you do not get in Exodus through Deuteronomy. You only get the explanations of it and how to do certain things. For specifically the Feast of Ingathering, the 8th day of Sukkot, you only get that understanding from how Jubilees ties Numbers and Deuteronomy together. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, man.
Amen.
So I truly believe this book, which, the very opening chapters of this book says that an angel on Mount Sinai was given this information and told Moses to write it down. And so I believe that this is what Paul was talking about in Galatians 3:19, and also Hebrews chapter 1 verse 2, where he's saying that angels mediated the law on Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the actual narrative of this book, is that angels are talking to Moses and explaining this is where all these laws came from. Mm-hmm. This is the history of your people, the patriarchs, all the way back to creation. This is why God gave this law for that and this for that, and here's how your forefathers followed this law. And so I think it's just beautiful. The Father did not want Moses in blind faith. He's telling him this is why we're doing all this. Beautiful book.
It is. I'm starting to love it. I'm still, 2 Esdras is still my favorite, but this is getting there. This is getting there.
This one doesn't have a lot of prophecy, whereas 2nd Esdras, is just, it's got so much good prophecy that makes sense of Daniel and Revelation and things. But this one's more explanation of Torah itself,
which we need so badly, because we're all new to it, and so, whether new means a couple of years or 10 years, we're all like just new. So we need as much information as possible, and again, I think what's really on both of our hearts to eventually learn is the calendar, because going back to part 1, chapters 1 through 2. I mean, just like the meaning of Sabbath, he's like, behold, I'm gonna take out a people from all people, and to them I'll teach the Sabbath, and they'll do it with us, and it's like, oh man, I want to do it when they're doing it, and I want to do the feast days when they're doing it. So the calendar just became a lot more important to me after really
Yeah.
studying through Jubilees 1 through 2.
Hey, did you notice last week when you were reading Jubilee 6 where it says that the Shavuot, the Feast of First
Mm-hmm.
Fruits, is a renewal of the covenant every year?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Isn't that beautiful?
it is.
So this is why I love the start of Jubilees chapter 1, because it tells you this whole conversation has taken place as Moses is on the mountain, which is Shavuot.
Amen.
It's just so beautiful.
It
I'm
is.
sorry, I'm getting excited. Getting off track.
All
So,
right, chapter 8. Let's see, so how many verses are in here? We'll just split it in half. 30. Okay, so we'll just stop at 15. Okay, sounds good. Sorry if I got you guys dizzy. All right, Jubilees chapter 8. In the 29th Jubilee, in the first week, in the beginning thereof, Arphaxad took to himself a woman, and her name was Rasu'eah, the daughter of Shushan, the daughter of Elam, and she bore him a son in the 3rd year in this week, and he called his name Canaan. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he read what was on thereon, and he transcribed it and sinned owing to it, for it contained the teachings of the watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and the moon and the stars and all the signs of heaven. So that's an interesting passage. We'll definitely talk about this here in a second. And he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noach about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. And in the 13th Jubilee, in the 2nd week, in the 1st year thereof, he took to himself a woman, and her name was Melka, the daughter of Madai, the son of Japheth. And in the 4th year he begat a son, and called his name Shelach, for he said, Truly I have been sent. And in the 4th year he was born, and Shelach grew up and took himself a woman, and her name was Muach, the daughter of Kesed, his father's brother, in the 31st Jubilee, in the 5th week, in the 1st year thereof. And she bore him a son in the 5th year thereof, and he called his name Eber. And he took unto himself a woman, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nebrod. This is, I think, the translation for Nimrod in the CEPHER. In the 32nd Jubilee, in the 7th week, in the 3rd year thereof, and in the 6th year thereof, she bore him a son, and he called his name Peleg. For in the days when he was born, the children of Noach began to divide the earth amongst themselves. For this reason he called his name Peleg. And they divided it secretly amongst themselves, and told it to Noach. And it came to pass in the beginning of the 33rd Jubilee that they divided the earth into 3 parts, for Shem, Ham, and Japheth, according to the inheritance of each, in the 1st year, in the 1st week, when one of us who had been sent was with them. So every time you see one of us, this is one of the angels, and I just love this. It's just so awesome. And he called his sons, and they drew nigh unto him, and they and their children, and he divided the earth into lots, which his 3 sons were to take in possession. And they reached forth their hands and took the writing out of the bosom of Noah, their father. And I'm actually going to stop here because I want to talk a little bit about some of these divisions. So I'll let you go ahead and go first, bro.
oh, okay. Well, I just, man, this chapter is huge, brother. I mean, like the first 4 verses, we get just the introduction. This is, in my opinion, this is the rebirth of the occult
Mm-hmm.
right here. Like, so it was squashed at the flood from judgment. The Nephilim are taken care of. The rebellious angels are taken care of. All the men that had learned that type of unrighteousness are killed in the flood, who are not following Yahweh. And then now Noah's sons are repopulating. One of them finds the teachings of the Watchers and starts sinning because of it, and doesn't want to tell Noah because he knows Noah's going to be upset.
Right.
After they just went through all that, but you know how it goes, right? So this is a few generations down. So they're just taking Noah's word for it at this point.
Right.
So
You're right.
They didn't
Good call.
experience the flood. They're just having to trust granddad's story, And so, like, for them, it's, and I personally believe most of them believed his story, but at the same time, here we got this dude named Canaan, and this guy's really important, Adam, because he's taken out of the Masoretic in Genesis chapter 10. Like, this guy should be in the Bible, but he's been purposely
Is he in the
removed.
Septuagint?
He is in Genesis
Oh,
chapter 10. He's in the
awesome.
Septuagint.
Which I'm
But
actually
guess what?
gonna. It's funny, actually. It's funny because I'm actually gonna read from chapter 10 here in just a second. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
And the reason I found that was because I was doing a genealogy study on Jesus in Luke chapter 3, in the genealogy there, and Canaan is the son of Arphaxad is mentioned. He's called Canaan in the transliteration, but he is mentioned to the son of Arphaxad in Luke chapter 3. And so then I
Huh.
went back to Genesis 10. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't remember that guy. Who's this guy? And I go back to Genesis 10. He's not in there, but then I looked in the Greek Septuagint. He's there.
Oh,
He's
wow.
the son of. It's intentionally been removed, and to me, it's like, and it has to do with the context of him finding the ways of the occult and restarting all this stuff, And his grandson marries the daughter of Nimrod. So
Mm-hmm.
like they're tight family. They're all cousins,
Right.
you know. This of course they're repopulating, and it's no wonder we start to see the reemergence of the giants. And if you will allow me, I'd like to give my theory on from the Book of Enoch on how that even came about, because I know that's a popular topic.
Yeah.
But basically, like Enoch 7 tells us that the Watchers taught mankind the art of cutting roots, and then the woman birthed giants. And then the giants were a problem and devoured the acquisitions of man, and worked lawlessness upon the earth and oppressed mankind. And so this was the idea that giants, many people think the giants are only a result of angels mating with human women. But if you look up the idea of cutting roots, and if you go back to Enoch chapter 7, it's these are in the same sentence right next to each other. It says they taught mankind the art of cutting roots, and the women birthed them giants. It's the very next phrase. Well, that's a progression, and if you look up the art of cutting roots, there's growth hormones in the roots of plants and trees. And so this is an actual, I mean, it's called an art in the Book of Enoch, but this is just modern science. So real quick, there's 5 major growth hormones that you can find in roots of plants and trees. It's gibberellins, auxins, cytokinins, ethylene, and abscisic acid. And these tell the plant or the tree how tall to grow before it sprouts limbs. It tells the limb how far to sprout out before it buds. And so it controls the height, the width, and the breadth of the sprouting, essentially, of plants and trees. And if you take these hormones out of the roots and topically apply them in other ways, it will affect the growth of something. So in the 1960s, the United States government, the military, U.S. military, they actually figured this out with gibberellins, and they started experimenting with this. And this is actually the initial ingredient in the product Miracle Grow is gibberellins.
Hmm. That's
It's
that's interesting, and I'd never heard that theory before. I've got.
so if
No, go ahead.
So my idea is, real quick, is just like, if they're finding the teachings of the Watchers written on rocks, it's not that difficult to start progressing in those teachings over time and what they were doing. Now, and suddenly, as you're about to read later in the Septuagint, guess what Nimrod starts to become?
Yeah.
So how do you become to be that if you're not born that? And this is where you have all these theories, and that's my personal theory from Enoch and from the medical science of it. So
And I listen to a certain extent. I agree, and I think maybe that element might just be added to the kind of theory that I have. It's a slightly different, but I think honestly, you could probably just add the root cuttings into this to make this concoction that actually made it work. Talking about the Book of Jasher, there was a story about the garments of Adam and Eve being kept in the ark, and that Ham stole them. He gave them to Cush, and Cush gave them to Nimrod. I believe that there was definitely some power in those garments, if you will. There was something about them. Now, obviously, it was the only clothing that literally was made by the hand of Yah. That there's something about that clothing. But if you take that element and you also add, the eating of blood, I think possibly Nimrod started to eat blood. And then that's a really interesting theory. I never heard that about the root cuttings, but I can definitely see that. If you add that in to this whole witchcraft, I think we see that. But really interesting. And again, actually, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Again, there's been so many awesome finds in the Septuagint that I really recommend you start reading this. There's a lot of things just taken out. But, in Genesis chapter 10, verse 9. All right, we'll start at verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod, right? Nimrod. He began to be a giant upon the earth, right? Like, how do you, like, so that was Sean was just saying, like, how do you begin to be a giant on the earth? I think it's, my beliefs, it's a collection of those garments that he acquired, Adam and Eve's garments he acquired, along with the eating of the blood, and excuse me, also the writings of the Watchers, which could have led him to maybe possibly eating the blood and the root cuttings, if you will. And then we see here that he began to be a giant upon the earth. You don't get this in the Masoretic. He just said he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. But, I mean, this is very clear. He began to be a giant, and he was a giant hunter before the Lord God. Therefore, they say as Nimrod, the giant hunter before the Lord. So one way or the other, I do believe that Nimrod was the first reemergence of the giants, and that's been a big question. If the Most High did bring the flood, killed all the, which was we saw earlier was the main purpose, was to kill the offspring of the fornication of the angels and women, the giants, if you will. How did they come back? And they're all over. They're all over the place post flood. I mean, of course, the most famous we know, Goliath was still there. We know it was Og, not Sihon, but Og, right? Yeah, Og, and it said his bed was how many cubits? 9 cubits or something like that, which was depending on
supposedly like 15 feet.
Yeah, if you use the royal Egyptian cubit, yeah, it's like 15 or 16 feet. Anyways, obviously, so they were around. So I do believe that Nimrod was the first one, and again, I think a combination of the garments, the eating of the blood, the teaching from the Watchers that we saw Canaan resurface, and now I'm going to add this too. Thanks, Sean. I think that's an excellent point with the root cuttings. But either way, that's the beginning of the giants. And people might say, "Oh, what does this matter?" These are the tough questions that people don't understand. And honestly, to even understand that giants existed is a huge point, because why else do we get commands from the Most High to go in and kill every man, woman, and child and beast and everything? It's like, well, because this corrupted DNA had come back into His creation that wasn't supposed to be there, and so they were all eliminated. We see different groups. We see the Edomites destroying their portion and to get their portion in Mount Seir, and we see the Most High using these different groups, not just the Israelites, to destroy these the Amorites and all the ites, all the ites, if you will.
That's right. And in fact, there's even a story in 2 Samuel chapter 8 where David's fighting the Moabites, and then after he conquers them, he lines up all the men and then literally measures them. And whoever was 2 measures tall, he killed them. So, like, there you go. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Like, why did he just kill the men that were the tallest, that literally were twice the size of a regular man? And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So yeah, there's this problem of giants that started again after the flood. And what I think is fascinating, like what we just read from chapter 8 here, where Keenan found these writings and he sent on to them, it says specifically, and to observe the omens of the sun, moon, and stars, and the signs of the heaven. Well, this is a very common trait with the occult, right? With the astrology that's involved in all that. And this is what we see in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19, where it says, obviously Yahweh is trying to encourage them to not practice the behaviors of the people of the land that they're about to go in and conquer. And he says, unless you lift up your eyes unto heaven, and when you see the sun, moon, and stars, even the host of heaven, should you be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has divided unto all the nations under the whole heaven. So he's trying to tell them, like, this don't do that, basically, right? That's bad. That's what they're doing, because they look to the signs of certain things as a part of their religious practice. And that's one of the things mentioned here about these writings of the Watchers. And we get that actually in Enoch chapter 8. I think I can't remember his name. It's Cocobiel, I believe, was the one that taught mankind the signs of the sun and moon. But yeah, as part of the enemy's version of religion,
Yeah, no, I agree, and obviously it exists. We see it even in the canon. We see the Janus and Jambres, the magisters, in Pharaoh's court, that they were able to duplicate a staff turning into a snake. How do you do that? Obviously they're doing some sort of divination, some sort of witchcraft, and I'm sure it involved omens and blood and whoever knows, who knows. But
And the enemy is always perverting what the Father naturally allows or does himself. So he naturally uses, like Genesis 1:14 through 17, the sun, moon, and stars for signs, seasons, days, and years. But to start to create not for the right reasons, using those things that were put in the creation model, but to start to pervert that and use them for other things, that's where you run off into the pagan religions.
Yeah.
It's just sad. It's really sad. But I just love this introduction here of this guy, Canaan, and who he was and why. And I love the fact that that Nimrod, obviously he's called Nimrod. That's the Greek transliteration because of the Septuagint found mostly in the Greek. Excuse me, the Book of Jubilees found mostly in the Greek. But they're just basically giving you the setup, in my opinion. And I don't think this is any accident after what we just read from Jubilees chapter 7. Where Noah was seen. There's some issues here with Ham. What does Ham do when he gets chastised? He leaves. He gets mad. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely not a heart of obedience to his father at all. And then it says that he built cities, and then Japheth built cities because he was jealous of Ham's cities. But yet Shem, he stayed near at Noah and built a city there because he was the one that carries down the blessing. He's the one that's obedient. We're going to read about that later. But so it's all a correlation here. It's all a progression.
And it was so interesting. It just dawned on me. In the dream vision of Enoch, he talks about how they had 3 bulls, and one of the bulls stayed with that bull, and so we see that with Shem. And so it's just so awesome how everything just ties in together to tell one big story.
Yeah, man, we're accidentally making this a Enoch Jubilees comparison.
I know.
It's amazing.
All right, so we probably should move a little faster. It took us about an hour and a half to go through a chapter and a couple of verses. So, and so with that being said, we're coming to the land dispersion, and this is honestly I didn't realize how in depth of a topic this was. I think I really misused my time yesterday, and I spent almost probably 5 or 6 hours trying to dig and figure out where this was because. As Sean and I were talking offline, and admittedly so, some of these terms are antiquated and they're just not used anymore. Like this mountain range of Rapha we're going to read about, and this river Tina, they don't exist. But thankfully, there was men before us that did some of this research, and mainly R.H. Charles, who did a lot of these translations for us. A lot of us read from the R.H. Charles version, but I'm going to try to do the best I can. What I'm about to show you guys from the research I've done is in no way complete, and in no way am I being dogmatic that this is it. But I did put a lot of time in this, and I actually want to put more time into it because I really want to get an idea, for whatever reason, and just get an idea of where. I just at least want to know where Shem's territory is. I think that's important to us and relevant to us for the last days. But. So let me read through this, and I've got a little map that I put together and put these things together. So verse 12, Jubilees 8, verse 12, and there came forth on the writings as Shem's lot, the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself and for his sons for the generations of eternity, right? So that's what I was talking about. It's important for these last days. From the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, from the mouth of the water from the river Tina, and his portion goes towards the west through the midst of this river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abysses, out of which this river goes forth and pours its waters into the sea Miat, and this river flows into the great sea. So here we got like 4 different terms, and none of them make sense in today's modern day in our maps. So going through all this, the key behind this really was finding the mountain range of Rapha, because once you found this, you could find pretty much find everything else. And so I did find where it's just a small bit, small part right here. It says the Book of Jubilees 8, 12, 16 and 28 mentions a mountain range it calls Rapha, which Professor R.H. Charles associated with the Riphean, i.e. the Ural Mountains, which we'll see here actually makes a lot of sense because a couple interesting facts. Let's see, the border between Europe and Asia is actually the Ural Mountains, so that's really interesting, right? I'm going to close some tabs here, save some CPUs or so. Does the Europe-Asia boundary exist? The border between Europe and Asia, as it exists today, was first defined by Philip Johann von Strahlenberg, an explorer and Swedish army officer. His border followed the chains of the Ural Mountains. So we're seeing the same thing here. It's interesting that it serves as a border even to this very, very day. And just another witness. Just have found multiple witnesses that the Ural Mountains is the boundary between Europe and Asia. So let's start there. And I want to talk about this real quick. So I'm going to pull up a different screen share and just show you guys. So hopefully this works. Let's see. Sean was telling me that it was a little hard to see, so we'll see how this works. So obviously I've got this on a biblical Earth map. I'm trying to use my terminology here, right? So here, and can you see this pretty well, Sean, or is it too zoomed in? Okay. All right, good. That's what I was trying to do. Okay, so here are the Ural Mountains, and it talks about then the river Tina, and this is a little hard part because it talks about the Ural Mountains, and in the middle of the Ural Mountains, a river flows from it, and there's actually two rivers that flow from it. One river that flows this way and dumps out here, and the other one that flows down here. The one that made the most sense as I continued to read on was this river here that flowed this way, and it says that I'm actually going to just pull up the scripture alongside it here. So it says from the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, so we're right here, okay, from the mouth of the water river Tina, and his portion goes towards the west through the midst of this river. So either one, whether it's going down here or here, his portion is west. So and I know this goes against everything that we've been taught. We've been taught that this is all Japheth's territory right here, but not according to Jubilees. And really, in the canon, we really don't get a lot, Sean, as to really where these territories actually are. But here in Jubilees, we have landmarkers, something we can go off of. So it's telling us, and again, I'm not being dogmatic, but Jubilees is telling us that these Ural Mountains, right, in the middle of it, there's this river that goes forth, and all the land west of this river is Shem's. So Europe is actually Shem's according to Jubilees. And again, I'm going to put a little more time into this to make sure, but this is what it's saying. And let me just continue to read here. And his portion goes through the west, through the midst of this river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abysses, out of which this river goes forth in its waters into the sea Miat, which is nowhere to be found. Miat can either be this Arctic Sea up here, or it could be the Mediterranean. Sean thought, hey, it could be an acronym or a shortened version of Mediterranean. It does make sense. You've got all four of the letters, is part of the Mediterranean, so it could be this river here. Either way, Europe is part of his inheritance. So if it is this river here, all the land west of it is the river. And I think it is important to use a biblical Earth map because when we look at a globe, it's just a little bit different. Let me just keep going so I don't take too long on this. And all that is towards the north is Japheth's. So what's north of this? All this up here, it says this is all Japheth's up here. So we're talking about China, we're talking about Japan, we're talking about Russia, the Philippines, all this. It would technically be India, but we see a little bit later that India is actually part of Shem's territory here. Basically, and I know this is really awful, but I was literally just taking notes as I went along and did my research. And what we see here in green is basically what I found to be Shem's territory. This right here, all this right here. Actually, it goes down a little bit into Africa and all throughout here. So let me just continue to read so this doesn't take too long. But I will promise you guys, I do actually want to do a longer study just on this because this fascinates me because, it goes against everything we've been taught. In modern day theology, Gomer and Gomer is in Turkey, so it's like right here, or I'm sorry, like right here. So it's just like really, it goes against everything. And all that is towards the north is Japheth, and all that is towards the Negev which the Negev is the Negev desert, right, in Israel. So everything that is towards the Negev, right? So it says everything that's towards the north is Japheth. Everything that's towards the Negev is Shem. So this is pointing down towards here. Verse 14, and his portion extends along the great sea, and it extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue, which looks towards the Negev. Again, looking towards this area. So we're talking about this area right here. There's this little mouth. There's this little mouth area that points towards the Negev. So it's talking about an area that goes down through here. Let's see. Let's see. I'm sorry. And a straight line until it reaches the west of the tongue, which looks towards the Negev. For this sea is named the tongue of the Mitzri Sea. This is the Red Sea, the Egyptian Sea, right here. So we're talking about this area right here. Verse 15, and it turns from here towards the Negev, towards the mouth of the great sea on the shore of its waters, and it extends to the west to Afra, which is Africa, and it extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon, which is the Nile, and to the south of the waters of Gihon to the banks of this river. So again, we're talking about it dips a little bit into Africa, right? And then it goes towards the Nile, the Gihon, right? And then it comes back up here. And it extends, verse 16, and it extends towards the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden to the south thereof, to the south and from the east of the whole land of Eden, and the whole east it turns to the east and proceeds till it reaches the east of the mountains Rapha. So again, it's talking about come up here and just coming right back up here. So literally we're talking about this portion so far. A little bit later it talks about this portion right here. And I'm not going to do this for Ham and Japheth. I really just want to do this for Shem. Okay, verse 17. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever unto his generations and forevermore. And Noach rejoiced that this portion came forth for Shem and for his sons, and he remembered all that he had spoken with his mouth in prophecy, for he had said, Blessed be Yahuwah Elohim of Shem, and may Yahuwah dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And I'm sorry, I think I tell you what I'll do, Sean. I'm just going to finish chapter 8, and then you just take chapter 9. And he, verse 19, and he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and that the dwelling of Yahuwah and Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and the Mount Sion and center of the navel of the earth, these three were created as holy places facing each other. So we're talking about boom, boom, and I do believe that Eden sat here because it talks about the four rivers, right? Talks about the Euphrates, talks about anyways, all these rivers like literally just pour forth from right here. And I do believe, in the last days that it's going to be plopped right in Shem's territory, 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles, whether it's a pyramid or a square or a cube, whatever it is, I think it's going to plop down right here, right where it was before. What's happened before will happen again, in my opinion. Verse 20, and he blessed the Elohim of Elohim, who had put the word of Yahuwah into his mouth, and Yahuwah forevermore. And he knew that a blessed portion and a blessing had come to Shem and his sons unto the generations forever, for the whole land of Eden, and the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of the east and India, and on the Red Sea and on the mountains thereof, and all. So pause. So again, he's talking about the holy of holies, right? So Eden, Sion, Sinai. Actually, Sinai is, I think, a little bit further down here into the peninsula. Anyways, it is what it is. And then it talks about the whole land of India. It talks about the east and India. So, again, from what I understand, from what I believe it's saying here is all this in green is all Shem's territory right here. And everything up here is Japheth's. And actually, we'll read it here in a little bit. All this is Ham's right here. Let me get back to it. So, again, on verse 21, east and India, and on the Red Sea, and the mountains thereof, and all the land of Bashan, and the land of Lebanon, and the lands of Kaphtor, and all the mountains of Sinir, and Ammana, and the mountains of Ashur in the north, and all the land of Elam, Ashur, and Babel, and Shushan, and Madai, and all the mountains of Ararat, and all the regions beyond. See, and that makes sense. See, this is important too. It says the mountains of Ararat. Well, again, modern day theologians place Gomer, sons of Japheth, in Turkey, right, and in Europe. But the mountains of Ararat is in Turkey, and it's saying right here that the Ararat, the area of Turkey is Shem's, right? And all the region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur, toward the north, a blessed and spacious land, and all that is in it is very good. And so the land north of Ashur, again, we're talking about all this right here. So, interesting stuff. A blessed and spacious land, and all that it is very good. Verse 22, and we'll talk a little bit about Ham's. And for Ham came forth the second portion beyond the Gihon, toward the south to the right of the garden. So, again, the Nile towards the right and the south of Gihon. So now we're talking about a border right here. So it's going right along the Shem's border. And it extends towards the south and extends to all the mountains of fire. And I looked it up, and Africa is known as the land of the mountains of fire. It has the most active volcanoes of anywhere on the earth. And it extends towards the west to the Sea of Atel, could be the Atlantic, right? And it extends towards the west till it reaches the Sea of Mauk, that sea into which everything which is not destroyed descends. And it goes forth towards the north of the limits of Gadir, so which Gadir, so it goes, so it's basically talking about going around here and coming up through here. And it goes forth to the coast of the waters of the sea up to the waters of the great sea till it draws near to the river Gihon and goes along the river Gihon till it reaches the right of the Garden of Eden. So it literally just makes a big loop as you see here on this map. And I'm going to stop screen sharing this, and I'm going to go back to the scriptures. Give me just a second. Hang on. Give me just a moment, and I'll pull this back up. And here we go. Okay. And
Man, there's so.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's so much information there.
I know. And like I said, I didn't want to take up too much time, but I thought this was so important. Like I said, I'm going to do a follow-up to this, brothers and sisters, because there's just so much here. Oh yeah, and let me just finish this up, and we'll finish up chapter 8. And for okay. Oh yeah, let me finish. Sorry. And it goes forth towards the north to the limits of Gadir, and it goes forth to the coast of the waters of the sea, to the waters of the great sea, till it draws near to the river of Gihon, and goes along the river Gihon till it reaches the right of the Garden of Eden. So again, it just made that big loop that we saw of Africa there. And in this land which came forth for Ham as the portion which he was to occupy forever for himself and his sons unto their generations forever. And for Japheth came forth the third portion beyond the river Tina, to the north of all the outflow of its waters, and extends northeasterly to the whole region of Gog and to all the country east thereof. So again, that was that whole Russia, China, Mongolia. I mean, just everything, all of Asia and all the Asian area. And it extends northerly to the north, and extends to the mountains of Kelt. I could not find this. Towards the north and towards the Sea of Mauk. And it goes forth to the east of Gadir as far as the region of the waters of the sea. And it extends until it approaches the west of Farah, and it returns towards Afarag. And it extends easterly to the waters of the Sea of Miat. And it extends to the region of the river Tina in a northeasterly direction until it approaches the boundary of its waters towards the mountain Rapha, and it turns round towards the north. This is the land which came forth for Japheth and his sons as the portion of his inheritance, which he should possess for himself and his sons for their generations forever, 5 great islands and a great land in the north. But it is cold, and the land of Ham is hot, and the land of Shem is neither hot nor cold, but it is blended cold and heat. And so, yeah, a lot there. And I'm sorry if I took too long on that. And again, I'm not dogmatic about the research I found, but pretty certain about some of the things. But again, I'm going to have a follow-up here so I can really have my thoughts together and have a better presentation for you guys. But since we were going through it, I didn't want to just skip it and be like, I don't know. I wanted to have something for you guys. So,
no, that was great.
Anyways.
That was great. Yeah, the River Tina, right? Hey, did you notice that many of these names have like the transliteration of them, and as we're reading them, it seems to have a Hebrew feel to it, which I think is interesting. Like Rapha, we know means healing, and Miat, and I mean Maruk, and these things. I mean, it sounds like these Hebrew words that we see other places in Scripture or variants of them, and it makes me think of what you're going to read later in Jubilees chapter 12, where it says that Abraham was taught Hebrew
Mm-hmm.
because it was the language of creation. So if this is all happening before the Tower of Babel, this land assignment and division, then Noah is speaking Hebrew.
Yeah.
And they would have these names of these things would be named Hebrew names, you know,
I'm on board
which I
with
think,
that. I'm on board with
yeah,
that.
you know, if everyone spoke Hebrew before the Tower of Babel, it's just interesting because as it says later in chapter 12, that since the language has changed, that no one was speaking Hebrew. And so Abraham had to be taught it so he could read the books of his fathers. And that's where he could learn righteousness. And which I think one of those books personally was probably Enoch, but I'm kind of biased, I guess. Um, but I think it's fascinating. This little stuff that you read in here. One of them was verse 24, where it talked about the land that came forth for Ham as a portion which he was to occupy forever. I just hope the viewer remembers that statement later and next week when you review chapter 10, because that comes into play.
Is that when they take over Shem's territory illegally?
When Canaan, the one
Yeah.
that was cursed,
Yeah.
he receives the cursing of breaking this land oath, and because he goes and takes the portion of Shem's land near the Mediterranean, which is what we now would call the modern day land of Canaan. That's where that term even comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple final thoughts on the map. You know, what's really interesting is, you know, again, in the Book of Enoch, it's got this dream vision. If you guys haven't seen it, I have a 3-part series on Enoch, short videos. Well, the first one's 9 minutes, second one's like 22 minutes, the third one's like 20-something minutes. Anyways, on one of them, I go through the dream visions, and really interesting. It basically tells the whole story from beginning to end, and uses like animals as a metaphor, you know, or as a symbol for, you know, for men and for man and that kind of stuff. But anyways, it says that that Noah was, and listen, I'm not racist. It just, the text says what it says. It says that Noah was a white bull, and from this white bull came forth 3 bulls. One bull was white, one bull was red, and one bull was black. But what I find fascinating about that is even science will tell you the same thing. The human race, most recognize 3 or 4 basic races of man. Most will actually say 3. You've got the Caucasian, the white race. You've got the Mongolian or Mongoloid, some say, and you know this is the Asian or I guess you can say Asian race. I'm gonna be careful with my words because I really do believe that we're all one in Messiah Yeshua, whether we're white, black, green, red, whatever. I really feel like we're all the same. But since we're talking about this, I think this is interesting stuff to talk about. That even science will agree that just like the dream vision of Enoch, that there was a white, a red, and a black. Period. I just thought that was really interesting, and we see that. With the spreading of the earth, and we see the still to this day three races. So really interesting. But also, if you noticed on that map that I had, it looked like Japheth had like the biggest portion, and we know that in Genesis 9:27 it says YHWH shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. But anyways, the key is shall enlarge, right? What does that word mean? It says to be spacious, to be open, to be wide, to be spacious or open or wide, to make spacious, make open. So we see this here that it's like a wide open space. So if it did look like Japheth got the bigger portion, it may not have been the most desirable portion, but it looked like the biggest portion, which I thought was pretty interesting, and that went along with what Noah prophesied, that that he would enlarge, that Yahuwah would enlarge him and just have this massive territory for him, which what reality became.
That's amazing. Yeah. Can you imagine just nothing, no cities, just regrowth vegetation after the flood, everything, a lot of mud, obviously. As we read at the beginning of this chapter, even certain things are still drying out, so they become invisible again, which is how Canaan found the writings. But just wide open, no territories, no states, no roads, just like as far as you can see. But clearly, to give these land boundaries to his sons, they had to have already explored to know where the corners and edges of these land boundaries were, or stuff like the River Tina or the Mountains of Asher, or they had to somewhat know some geography to even know what they were given.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to have ventured out at some point. And of course, it doesn't really tell us when this whole event is taking place, how many years after the flood.
And honestly, once again, this I think this really confirms the narrative of angels, because there's descriptions of land masses that you don't see as a human being. You have to be like what we see in Google Maps right now, or Google Earth, where you can like zoom out and zoom in. You have to have the knowledge of like an angel, or to be able to know when it talked about like the tongue facing. Well, there's that landmass, in that area that looks like a tongue that faces the Nile, and it's like, that was given to Noah by somebody, and again, we know that this book was written by angels. That's the only way this happens, and it's like legitimately true. Like it's 2019 right now, or whatever the Hebrew year is, and we can see that was true. That this book that was written pre-Yeshua, is still true today of land masses. So it's so confirming and awesome. And again, these are some of the reasons why I really wanted to go into this, because again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the actual line of Shem was, if it was white or black or green or red. It doesn't matter. But I do find it fascinating, especially since we're going through this. Really, what's the truth? Because again, you saw it right there for your own eyes that it said Shem's portion included the mountains of Ararat. It included Turkey. Well, modern day theologians put Turkey as Japheth's territory. It's wrong. We're children of truth. We love truth, and I want to share truth. So I just thought that was really, really interesting study. But definitely gonna do a follow up on it. There's a lot more to it.
Actually, you mentioned the tongue concept with Egypt and everything. That's I think it's Isaiah 11. Talks about the tongue of Egypt.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I don't remember that. Okay, cool.
Isaiah 11:15, I think. It says, "And the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea. With his mighty wind, he shall shake his hand over the river and smite in 7 streams and make men go over dry shod."
Awesome.
So, yeah, man, it's like there's so much fun stuff in here. This is a really helpful book. Not just fascinating to me, it's a helpful book to understanding so many other things in Scripture. And I feel like it's definitely been deprived from us. It's because the Ethiopians have had this particular book in their canon for almost 2,000 years.
Amen.
So it's
Amen.
Interesting.
So say what?
And the Ethiopian Levite priests, they follow the Jubilees calendar.
Awesome.
And they do feasts and things by it and everything. So it's it's interesting.
So let's finish up with chapter 9. It's a shorter chapter, which is good, because that'll actually we're coming up on hour 2 already. That'll give us a little bit of time to hang out with the chat, maybe answer a few questions, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to find your channel, and to learn a little bit more about Kingdom in Context and how they can find you and all that kind of stuff. But so without further ado, let's go through chapter 9, so we have a little bit of time to hang out.
Yeah, this is a shorter chapter.
Yeah, and I'll let you take.
Sorry. Here in verse 1. And Ham divided amongst his sons. The first portion came forth for Cush towards the east, and to the west of him for Mitzrayim, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan. And Shem also divided amongst his sons, and the first portion came forth for Elam and his sons, to the east of the river
Hiddekel. Yeah.
That's the eighth letter. Till it approaches the east, the whole land of India, and on the Red Sea on its coasts, and the waters of Dedan, and all the mountains of Membri, and Elam, and all the land of Shushan, and all that is on the side of Farnak, to the Red Sea and the river Tina. And for Asher came forth the second portion, all the land of Asher, and Nineveh, and Shinar, on the border of India, and it ascends and skirts the river. And for Arphaxad came forth the third portion, all the land of the region of Kasdim, to the east of the Parat, bordering on the Red Sea, and all the waters of the desert close to the tongue of the sea, which looks towards Mitzrayim, all the land of Lebanon and Sinir and Amana, to the border of Parat. And for Aram came forth the fourth portion, all the land of Aram, Naharim, between the Hiddekel, and the Parat to the north of Kasdim, to the border of the mountains of Asher and the land of Ararat. And there came forth for Ludi the fifth portion, the mountains of Asher, all they pertaining to to them until it reaches the Great Sea, until it reaches the east of Asher, his brother. And Japheth also divided the land of his inheritance amongst his sons. And the first portion came forth for Gemer, to the east from the north side to the river Tina. And in the north there came forth for Magog all the inner portions of the north, until it reaches to the sea of Meat. And for Madai came forth as his portion, that he should possess from the west of his two brothers to the islands, and to the coast of the islands. And for Yavan came forth the fourth portion, every island and islands which are towards the border of Lodi. And for Tubal there came forth the fifth portion in the midst of the tongue which approaches towards the border of the portion of Lodi, to the second tongue, to the region beyond the second tongue, and to the third tongue. And for Meshach came forth the sixth portion, all the region beyond the third tongue, till it approaches the east of Gadir. And for, oh man, these words are fun.
I know.
And for Iraq there came forth the seventh portion, four great islands in the midst of the sea, which reached to the portion of Chem. And the islands of Kamaturi came out by lot for the sons of Arphaxad as his inheritance. And thus the sons of Noach divided unto their sons in the presence of Noach their father, and he bound them all by an oath, imprecating a curse on everyone that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by his lot. And they all said, so be it for themselves and their sons forever throughout their generations till the day of judgment, on which Yahuwah Elohim shall judge them with a sword and with fire for all the unclean wickedness of their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression and uncleanness and fornication and sin.
Awesome. Verse 14 just finally made sense to me. And, the cursing of Canaan, you could think it's directly related to what Ham did, but it's like what Noah really was doing was prophesying, because he prophesied about the Lord God dwelling in the tents of Shem, and Japheth being enlarged. Canaan will be his servant, right? And that Canaan would be Shem's servant, but also that Canaan's cursed. And you're right. You just talked about this a minute ago. You're like, this is going to come into play in chapter 10, when the Canaanites actually live in Shem's territory. And here it is right here. You're right. This didn't pop out to me when I was doing the study for it, but just when you just read it, it all came together that the curse came on them for living in Shem's territory. Not necessarily. I mean, it could have been twofold. The curse could have been twofold. It could have been a curse passed to Canaan from Ham's sin, but it really looks like he was just prophesying that he would be cursed because he was going to live in the land of Shem. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, if you do the math from the cool thing about Jubilees is it actually has in brackets the years that things happen. And it tries to do the math for you. I think that's R.H. Charles trying to actually do the math for you. But even in the text itself, it'll say, in the 49th Jubilee, in the first week thereof. And so unless you know how to calculate Jubilee years, which there's 7 sevens, right, that makes up a Jubilee, 49, 50 years. And so as this book progresses, it will actually tell you which year things happen. So if you go back to Jubilees 5, verse 31, it tells you that this was the year that these events that finish chapter 5 go all the way through chapter 6, which is the flood, that year of the flood, and then into chapter 7, that by the moment that Ham sees Noah uncovered in his tent and drunk, tells his two brothers, and Ham is reprimanded for this, and then the cursing of Canaan is spoken by Noah. That whole time period, all the way back to Jubilees 531, is a span of 8 years. So as we already read, that Arphaxad had his first son 2 years after the flood. So it doesn't tell us when Ham started to have his 4 boys, but we know from the time of the flood starting till the time of Noah cursing Canaan, the son of Ham, was an 8-year span. So Ham had 4 boys in 8 years. So these are just little kids, and so that's why, in my opinion, Ham was one. He was already born. So the theory about the theory about Ham doing something to his mother, I don't buy at all, because Canaan was already born when this thing happened. And furthermore, he's just a little kid because he's the youngest of the 4 boys. He could have even been a baby at this time, if not a toddler. And it says that Ham got mad that Noah cursed him, and he left, and he went and moved somewhere else. So, like, this is a big point of context, and I'm always about context. So
Yeah.
this is a big point of context of, like, seeing, like, this is only an 8-year span from the flood. Then Ham moves away from Noah, and it's appropriate that Shem didn't, because his portion settled and was given to him. A part of it was Ararat, and that's of course where the the boat landed in the mountains of Ararat. So it would make sense that he would stay close to home. It's his land anyway. He was given that portion anyway. But Ham leaves because he's mad because Noah cursed Canaan. It's a prophecy. And Canaan hadn't done what we're about to see in chapter 10 by taking this land that wasn't his, that was a part of his uncle Shem's. So it's fascinating to me because this is an actual curse unto death. Like, this is a big deal, like spiritual death. Like, this is what reminds me of the passages in Deuteronomy. I think it's chapter 22, where it talks about the Father hates those who move the ancient boundary stones.
Right.
This is what that's about. Is that these guys at the right off the boat, just a few years after getting off the boat, they all got their land assignments. As I just read in chapter 9, now all the sons of Ham, Shem, and Japheth got all their lands as well. So within the big territories of their fathers, all the kids started getting their little land assignments, which are still big areas probably, but they were all supposed to stay there, chill, have a good time, like populate in peace, serve the Lord, follow his commandments, don't make a big deal about things, but
don't eat blood.
Right.
Don't eat the blood.
Don't eat blood. Don't be sacrificing people like that. Just serve the Lord in peace, man, and you'll be blessed, right? That's what he tries to tell them earlier, but they don't. And the Canaan runs in, takes some land. He's cursed because of it. So I agree with you when you were assessing the giants. There is a DNA problem that we see in Deuteronomy all the way through the days of David. I personally believe it's still on the earth today. But specifically, they were territorial in the land of Canaan, trying and against Abraham and Isaac, and also the returning Israelites coming out of the Exodus. They were territorial against them. And they were, because they were possessing a land not theirs, that was breaking an oath from their forefathers all the way back to this moment we're reading about right now. So you have a twofold reason for judgment upon the people in the land of Canaan. And as far as apologetics go, brother, this is a huge sticking point for atheists and agnostics. They'd say, how in the world is supposedly your loving God going to send in and start mass genocide in these tribes in Canaan? Well, for one, they were willingly and knowingly breaking an oath their forefather had made not to live in this land. They were given a huge portion of land on the Atlantic coast of Africa, and they're in there by sedition. And the penalty of breaking this sedition law was death. And then also we have all the practices that they were doing, which also breaks the laws leading unto death, which is why we're told in Genesis 12 that the sin of the Amorites is not yet full, but it was growing. And so, there's several legal reasons within the context of Scripture that they were to be driven out of that land, and if not, killed.
Right. So,
it's the Father's very fair. He just follows his own rules.
and the depth of his fairness really was revealed to me when going through this, and he gave the law. And again, you don't see that in the canon. He gave the law. You see like little bits. You're like, oh, okay, man. But here it's just like straight up. He gave him the commandments, the judgments, everything. You're like, okay. That makes sense.
And we know that law was propagated to the other peoples beyond just Noah, Abraham's descendancy line. We know the other people, not just because of what we read here in Jubilees, but also in Genesis chapter 20 with Abimelech. With Abraham and Sarah. Sarah gets taken by another king, right? Mm-hmm. And then Abimelech is like, "Hey, man, why didn't you tell me she's your wife? And you've caused me to do this great sin." Right. And then Abraham had to pray for Abimelech and his household and his servants so that they would not be barren and they could actually have children again, because they were being judged and punished for breaking an eternal command of the Father and literally about trying to commit fornication or literally taking another man's wife. And so this is the Abimelech king acknowledging that he was in sin, but it was out of ignorance, and so he's mad at Abraham because of it. So how do they even know what sin was?
Good call.
This is not Abraham's family. This is some other people, So they all knew the law they were supposed to follow.
They just didn't want to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Let's maybe go for another. Do you have a little extra time, or are you pressed for time?
Sure, I'm good.
Well, okay.
It's a night of rest for me, so I'm good.
All right. So for those of you that are watching this as a recording, this is where the reading / commentary / teaching, if you want to call it, ends. Now we're gonna hang out with the chat. You're welcome to stay. Basically what we do with the chat is just hang out with the chat and answer questions and that kind of stuff. So just wanted to say Shabbat Shalom to Chris Rock, The Narrow Path. What's going on, brother? Believing is Seeing, Blue Doves, I Am His and He Is Mine, Song of Solomon, Amen. Joy Trulio, Cheryl Heard Prayer, welcome back. Defender of Truth, John Handy, Jeremy Fox, welcome, brother. Cloud9 Realty, Jennifer, good to see you, sister. New Netzer, Camilla. What's going on? What's going on, sister Camilla? Good to see you. Always standing tall for his name. Let's see, Josh Patzek, welcome back, bro. That icon you got, man, is crazy. The the avatar you got is crazy. Justin McRoberts, hey man, haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back, bro. David Shearer, here as always. Good to see you, bro. He says be back soon. He won't hear that. Yanni and Sophia, good to see you all. Brother Joe Hill, good to see you. Any case, so if you guys can do me a favor, if you can put your questions in all cap, this is like the only time it's okay to type in all capital letters. All of the times, don't do it on social media. Don't do it, but do it here so I can see your question a little better, because the chat kind of goes crazy sometimes. He almost said my name. I am his and he is mine. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just going to scroll up and see if there's any questions, Sean. Which, by the way, this is if you tuned in after a little bit after we started. This is Brother Sean with Kingdom in Context, and I'm going to do a screen share of his channel in just a minute. If someone moderators can go ahead and put a link to Sean's channel in the chat, I'll try to make sure I do that and put it in the description box as well. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a question from Shelly Hendricks. She said blonde question. Do you think there is a connection, by the way, the writings by Canaan from the Stone of the Watchers to the birth of the cuneiform? I'm going to hand that to you, Sean, because I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if you do either.
Well, you mean like
you want me to read it again? Yeah, I'm assuming like the cuneiform tablets, what the Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't that cuneiform?
Yeah, I mean, if we believe secular history and they want to try to tell us that, oh, that's the oldest writings we have of history and religion, is from these ancient cylinder seals. I don't personally believe it, because I believe what the scriptures say. I believe the Creator's version of history is passed down through his prophets. Which tells us that not only was that language only came about after the Tower of Babel, but those writings would have come about after the Tower of Babel, because Hebrew was what they spoke before the Tower of Babel. So, yeah, I think, and of course they're wildly variant from what the scriptures say. So I don't think there's a direct connection personally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheryl Hurd Prayer says or asks, land. What happens to us who do not live in the Holy Land? Please. I don't know exactly what you mean by that. I know it does say in Ezra somewhere, or no, it's a Baruch. He talks about how he will only protect those that will be found in the land in those days. Do you remember that verse, Sean?
Which one again?
There's I think it's either in Second Baruch or 2 Esdras. I'm pretty sure it's Baruch that says I'm just going off memory. It says, and I shall only protect those who shall be found within my borders in those days. And it's talking about the day of the Lord, and I'm assuming this is when we're gathered, and then His wrath is poured out. It's a verse that says. Let me see if I can Google it.
Yeah, I think it's chapter 13. But yes, if you're His and you are within the borders of the New Jerusalem, of the land. I mean, and this depends on exactly the context of what it says. It's in 1348. I'll read verse 47 real quick. The highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind of your people are they that are found within my borders. And then verse 49 helps as well. Now, when he destroys the multitude of the nations, they are gathered together. He shall defend his people that remain. So from all of our studies on the day of the Lord events and activities, this is the first resurrection happens. Everyone's taken within the borders of the New Jerusalem and protected, hidden away, right, as Isaiah 26:20 tells us. And then while Yeshua and his battle angels, Matthew 25:31, are coming down, to battle the battle of Armageddon and everyone that's gathered together to fight against him at his return. And so he's protecting his people. He takes them away from the wrath and indignation, as Isaiah 26:19-21 tells us. But then he's coming down to do that wrath on the wicked. And this is what Enoch chapter 62 and 63 also help flesh out, as well as Revelation 19. So, and Habakkuk 3 and Joel 2 and a whole bunch of other places. So it's, yeah.
So this is and this should just go along with what you said. 2 Baruch 29. Let's see. It says, verse 2. For at that time, oh, I'm sorry. This is okay. So they just messed up. This is verse 29, verse 1. Okay. And Yahuwah answered and said to me, that which will happen at that time bears upon the whole earth. That's when he asked, right? Is this going to happen in one place or in many places, right? Therefore, all who live in it will notice it. For at that time, I shall only protect those found in this land at that time. I think in the other version it says within my borders at that time. And it will happen that when all that which should come to pass in these parts has been accomplished, the Anointed One will begin to be revealed, and Behemoth will reveal itself from its place, and Leviathan will come from the sea, the two great monsters which I created on the 5th day of creation, and which I shall have kept until that time, and they shall... And I remember when you and Ken did this teaching, that they were going to be food, right? So, is Yeshua going to come out and slay them, and then they're going to be food? How that exactly works, I don't know, but interesting nonetheless. But
there's in the Septuagint, it actually says, I think it's chapter 74, Psalm 74, but it's only in the Septuagint you see this, where it talks about Leviathan and Behemoth, their sport for the angels.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Because there's an angel that actually restrains Leviathan right now. He's the one that's talking in the Apocalypse of Abraham. And he tells you that in chapters like 10 and 11.
That's right.
And so he's actually restraining him. And then when he loosens him and lets him go, this is where he and Behemoth come out. I think it's on the actual day of the Lord from everything I can tell, because they're causing some problems. And then they're actually slain by Yeshua and his angels when they return and used for food for the survivors of the day of the Lord.
Amen. So, well said.
And those guys were created on day 5, which means the Father knew this whole story was going to happen, and he made these 2 specific beasts on day 5 just for this purpose.
Yeah.
Because they're hidden away and only revealed in this day that comes up at the day of the Lord. So, like, he's been planning his magnificent day for his son from the very, very beginning.
Although I will say, and maybe Leviathan is like completely restrained and doesn't move anywhere, but part of me thinks that Leviathan has been used for like certain things throughout the years to like accomplish his will. I don't know, to devour. Which is in Esdras where he talks about Leviathan, that to whom thou created that they shall eat who thou wilt when thou wilt. I can't remember, but
it's chapter 6. I think it's verse like 45 or 46. Yeah,
but it basically talks about they're eating people, right? Like when the Most High says so, and at certain times. Fascinating topic.
I think Enoch chapter 60, but what you might be also thinking about is in the Apocalypse of Abraham. I think it's in chapter 21. It says that Leviathan lives in underground cave systems under the earth, under the sea. And when he moves, it causes earthquakes on the earth.
That's right. That's awesome.
So,
Janine Midkiff, which Shalom, sister, good to see you, by the way. What do you do for Sukkot? This year, it's changed a lot. I actually celebrated Sukkot a lot when I was a child. We actually built booths. It was awesome. I really want to do that again. But this year, I'm just going to do a little tent in my backyard, and I think Brother Tim's going to come join me. I was very unprepared this year. Next year, I really, really hope to do an organized one with you guys. Next year, I really hope to do an organized one for everyone. You guys know that we did a pretty large Passover, but we kind of dropped the ball on offering something for everybody to come on everything else. A lot of you guys know that if it's Yah's will, next year, we're going to have a physical location here in the Ozarks to do Shabbat and to do the feast days and whatnot. But to answer your question specifically, this year, I'm literally just going to have a tent in my backyard. Sean, what about you?
We have this lattice structure that's connected to our garage and our extra room in our next to the garage, and so we're gonna outfit that with lights and curtains and everything, and it becomes like a makeshift tent basically that we can. I'm trying to figure out how I can find palm branches, because I see in Jubilees that and Abraham is celebrating with palm branches, and he was one of the first people to do this. And so I think that that's fascinating, because we see palm branches are intimately connected to Sukkot in the canon, right? And those are they're also the tree of life, according to the Book of Enoch, is the palm tree, and the date palm was the fruit of the tree of life. And this is why you would see at Yeshua's triumphant entry, they're waving palm branches and singing Hosanna at him. I mean, it's all like, it's so beautifully connected. And I don't think Home Depot has palm branches. So and I live in Colorado, so it's kind of challenging to find some palm branches, but but we're going to make a makeshift tent and everything. We also have some people that are coming out to see us that we're going to be visiting as well in Estes Park in the Rocky Mountains. So that's a really beautiful scenic area.
Awesome. I had to actually pull up Apocalypse of Abraham real quick because I wanted to look at that scripture you're talking about. I want to screen share it and read it, but for two reasons: for that, and for the following question, which I know that a solid answer is in Apocalypse of Abraham, which we're going to go through one of these days, line by line, like we're doing here in Jubilees. But the question, this is from Jason Perkins: serpent in the garden, what was his deal? Was he before the fall of the Watchers? So I'm trying to find the chapter here in Apocalypse of Abraham, but it specifically says Azazel was in the serpent, and I think it's in Jasher. Is it in Jasher that it talks about how basically the angel Azazel was trying to go into different animals, and each animal rejected him, but finally the serpent allowed him to come in? Is that Jasher? I can't remember. But either way, do we agree that it was Azazel? And is this Azazel the same? This is where I get confused, honestly, and I could use your help. Is this the same Azazel that we see as the leader of the Watchers, or it's a different Azazel? Did he fall? And he must have fallen. Obviously, he fell before the 200 Watchers descended. We know that because this is the time of creation of Adam and Eve. What's your take on that, bro?
Azazel, as mentioned in Enoch 7, and also, and he's the one that he is implicit in teaching mankind unrighteousness, but he did not take a wife. And this takes a careful, slow reading of Enoch chapter 7 through 15. He receives a different judgment than the other Watcher angels that took wives and had kids. He did not. And he gets a different judgment. And chapter 9, all sin is ascribed to him. So this is the assumption that he was either an influencer of the other rebellious angels or their leader in some sense. Now, obviously, Semayazel is considered leader over the ones who took wives. But this Azazel cat seems to have all sin ascribed to him.
Do you believe this Azazel is the same Samael, the same Belial, the same Matsema, or are there multiple Satans, or is there one head Satan, and this is the same one that was in the garden? This is some stuff that that a lot of people ask me questions, and I'm honestly not very familiar with.
I believe there's the term Satan's is used in the plural on a few occasions, but when it starts naming a specific character responsible for certain things, there's only one it's talking about, and that is, Satan, the dragon of old, the serpent, the devil. In Jubilees, you're going to get there in chapter 10 next week. He's directly called Matsima and Satan in the same breath.
Right.
So it tells you who it's talking about. And then Azazel is also referred to in Enoch chapter 54. He's and it says, and then those who are subjected to him as associates, they're punished by the angels with these big chains. And this is our fulfillment of Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, when Michael takes the big chain and wraps up Satan,
right,
and puts him in the pit. So to me, in my estimation of my studies, the Azazel we see who's still running around, right? He didn't receive the same punishment as the other Watchers who are in Tartarus. And he's still running around, as we see, and he can still. So he's fallen in the sense that he's corrupt, obviously, and he's still running around the earth to and fro, seeking whom he may devour, as we know, and as Revelation 12 tells us, deceiving the whole world. But what I think is fascinating, I don't know if you ever considered this, Adam, in the book of Job, verse 1 and 2, or chapters 1 and 2, where it says the angels came before God and Satan came with them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think that Satan fell from heaven in this typical Christian description where he can never go back.
Right.
But when you understand the biblical creation model and you understand the Torah, that different punishments apply for different reasons. And all the angels who are male, even according to Jubilees chapter 15, this is actually another question in the chat that's been asked multiple times that I hope we can address after this, but about the angels themselves. But if you understand the Torah, the biblical creation model, the different levels of the firmament, as well as how heaven above and all the angels that inhabit the levels of heaven above, they follow Torah. They, just like mankind was instructed 3 times a year to present yourself before the Lord, that's what they got to do too. So it shouldn't be like, once you understand the Torah, you start reading Job 1 and 2, and you're like, oh, of course the angels have to come and present themselves to the Lord. And then Satan comes with them on one of these occasions. Right. And then, God's not like, Yahweh's not mad at him, right? He's like, where you been? It's this weird conversation.
I know.
Have you read the Testament of Job, an apocryphal book, the Testament of Job?
No, I haven't.
It's fascinating, brother. And it actually it's an answer to your question. That's why I'm sorry I'm taking a little bit longer to get there. But when you asked about this is Azazel character, whether he's inhabiting or influencing somebody, and then we see in Judas, Satan enters Judas and he goes and leaves the Last Supper to do what he's going to do. You remember that terminology?
Yeah.
In the Testament of Job, it says that the same idea, that when Job's wife was talking to Job and says, you should just curse God and die.
Right.
This is that Satan standing behind her. And Job knew it wasn't his wife, basically, but she was being influenced by Satan.
See, explain so much. Wow.
And this is exactly what you're talking about in the Apocalypse of Abraham, where he sees the vision of garden of Adam and Eve and the tree of life, and Adam and Eve standing next to it, and then this Azazel character with these multiple wings standing behind the tree, feeding them the fruit. So it's like, yeah, like he's the main antagonistic character everywhere in the scriptures. He's going to be dealt with, but at the right time that's appointed for him, because right now he's just influencing other people to do bad stuff. But he's skirting the actual laws and breaking the actual Torah of God that would actually incur immediate punishment for him, so he can stay out roaming around and deceiving people. And I think the reason why he's actually chained up at the very end is because he actually tries to fight Yeshua and his angels at the return. So, but that's a deeper study. I don't want to get off track. I'm sorry, brother.
Right, no worries. And just for the sake of time, if you guys want to look this up, it's here we go. Apocalypse of Abraham, chapter 21, talks about Leviathan we were talking about, and is it chapter 22 talks about Azazel in the garden. Oh wait, yeah, 21, 22. Yeah. Any case, so just for the sake of time, we'll move on. Let's see.
Someone asked in the chat, a few people asked in the chat about angels and how can they actually procreate.
Well, because it does say in Enoch 15 that they weren't made to marry and given marriage. But I don't know. Do you have a theory on that? I assume maybe when they fell, part of them became flesh and they had it. I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that one either.
Oh, this is a great question. It's considering we're actually in the Book of Jubilees, because when you get to chapter 15, verse 27, it says that the angels were made at their creation on day one. They were made circumcised.
Oh, well, there you go.
They're all male and they're all circumcised. This is why in Ezekiel 44, the Father promises, I will not have anyone, also in Isaiah 56, he promises, I will not have anyone that's uncircumcised in my house. So at the resurrection, all of us males will be made circumcised back into our bodies, whether you are or not in your lifetime before then. And all the angels at their creation on day one were made the same way. So the reason I'm saying that is they're physical beings. They're real. They can come and interact with us. They can eat food with Abraham. They can drink liquids. They can do stuff. Obviously, they have food, right? The bread of angels, the manna that fell from heaven. Mm-hmm. They have their own food source. They have their own land. And if you read the book of Enoch and he sees the different levels of heaven, just like in the Apocalypse of Abraham, like they have their own levels of heaven they exist in with their own places that they live. Like these are real tangible beings. They just have a higher capability in their spiritual body than we do in our fleshly body, which is what you were alluding to, Adam, in the book of Enoch, chapter 15, where it says they were created as immortal beings, spiritual, in living in heaven above, and they were not appointed wise because they didn't need to procreate. They were immortal. But this is why they transgressed which tells us angels can sin, and they went and took wives to have families and lived on the earth down below on this level of the firmament. So it's a fascinating story because Yeshua promises us at the resurrection in Luke 20, verse 36, we're going to be made like the angels. This is also repeated in Second Baruch chapter, I think it's 50 or 51. And so we're going to be made like the angels. So, and this is what Paul tries to explain to us in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 39 through 51, that we're made with earthly bodies now, but at the resurrection, we get the spiritual body. So it's like a different type of chemistry, a different type of physics. And we can do the things that Yeshua was doing after his resurrection, where he was like on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24, he just disappears, right? After he goes and breaks bread with the two guys, or like when in John chapter 20, he shows up in a locked room amongst the disciples. And then he's like, hey, you can touch my side, Thomas. And then he even says, you guys have something to eat? I'm hungry. So like, how can someone just show up in a locked room and then start eating food and it just doesn't fall to the ground?
Right.
So this is a real body that Yeshua has. He's wearing real clothes. He's eating real food. He's cooking a real breakfast for him. The next, that one morning where Peter jumps out of the boat and swims to him. And he's in a real body. It's just a glorified body. It's a spiritual body that was given initially to the angels above. So yeah, they could absolutely procreate if they chose to, but that was their test of obedience, in my opinion, was that they're given, too much is given, much is expected. They were given all knowledge and understanding to begin with. They watched the rest of creation happen, days 2 through 7, and they were blessed beyond us, 2 through 6, I'm sorry. But yeah, they were blessed beyond us, right? And then for them to transgress, it's a much more serious offense because they should know better.
They know that, right? They should have known better. I agree. And yeah. Well said.
Which is why Revelation 19 would call, like the angel would call John a brother, right? He's like, no, I'm your fellow brother, right? Don't worship me. So they're our angelic brethren, They're just living a different level of creation.
We saw something similar in the book of Tobit. Tobit, his travel companion. Tobias, his travel companion. I'm sorry. Wait, is the father? Wait. Hold on. I got that verse. Anyway, reverse. Anyways, the angel that was with him on the journey, we saw him eating and all that kind of stuff too. So really interesting.
Raphael. Yeah. We just reviewed that on Honor of Kings, and that's a fun book, man, because
it is.
Raphael's one of the head angels in the Book of Enoch. He's one of the big 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so that dude's just chilling on a journey with Tobias the son for 2 weeks, which is amazing. Like that's just. And he even tells him at the end, like, this whole time I was with you, I was eating and drinking, but it was just a vision. I really wasn't doing these things. all the things that you were doing, I really wasn't doing, but to help you on this journey so you wouldn't run away from me. I'm a little bit paraphrasing. He says that, I showed you in a vision that I was doing some of these things with you so you wouldn't be afraid, basically. And he reveals himself to both the father Tobit and the son Tobias at the end of the story that, hey, and they get all crazy and bow down and they're like, oh my gosh, who was this guy? And so it's the father definitely, he's made it. And this is the reason why I get excited about this is because if you really believe Genesis 1 and all the descriptions of the creation, and you really understand what Jubilees tries to tell you about the angels being made on day 1 and all the things that are just skimmed over in Genesis 1:1 but are explained in other books, you see the entire creation with billions of our brethren that were created just for us. Hebrews 1:14, that ministering spirits sent out to those who are inheriting salvation.
Right.
Like the Father's love for us is just exponential. We just are so deceived, by the enemy. So it's just such a beautiful story, man.
It is. Let's take another big question. This is a good one. This is from Grafted Garage, and we're going to read a little bit from 1 Corinthians 10. How is it that Paul permits eating meat sacrificed to idols from the market? How does this fit with Torah? And let's read a little bit from 1 Corinthians 10. Let me screen share. Okay. So some hard things that Paul says here that are hard to understand. Just like Peter says, beware of Paul's words. Some of you might use them to your own lawlessness and to your own destruction. 1 Corinthians 10:23. I'll read through 28. All things are lawful for me. That's interesting. But all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. But all things edify not. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. No, I read that wrong. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And I have to say, I don't know exactly how to take this here, because when you take a single witness of Paul, I don't believe I can take one thing that can be taken out of context to completely destroy everything that's written in the law and the prophets, and of course what came out of the mouth of Messiah Yahusha. But this is, just starting at verse 23, Sean. All things aren't lawful for us. How do you even start there? Technically, if the curse of the law was taken away, we're not judged according to it. So maybe on a technical aspect, all things are lawful for me, but all things aren't lawful for us. We can't participate in drunkenness and homosexuality and fornication and all these other things. It's not lawful for us, right? So help us out a little bit.
Well, I apologize. I was actually answering a question in the chat while you started this question.
Oh, okay.
What's the initial question?
Let me read it again.
I thought you had answered and were expounding.
She's Grafted Grosh. She asks, how is it that Paul permits eating meat sacrificed to idols from the market? How does this fit with Torah? Please, smiley face.
What scripture are we looking at here?
So I'll read it again. So basically, this is 1 Corinthians 10, where first of all he says all things are lawful for me, which, on a technical aspect, again, since considering the curse of the law is taken away, right? Which doesn't mean we just go and trample the law, but I guess if the curse is taken away, everything would be lawful. But I really don't think this is the context of, you can do whatever you want, because that's not the truth. So once again, these are hard words from Paul to understand. But it says here, basically, he's saying that, if you go to a feast, you just eat whatever. And I just don't agree with that. I'm just not going to eat. If someone's serving pork, I'm not going to eat it. Period. I don't want an abomination to come into my mouth. So basically he's saying, eat what's set before you. And, I don't know if I personally agree with that, because I'm just not going to eat pork or shellfish if it's offered to me. I'm just going to say I apologize. I can't eat this. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think, as always, context is so important, especially with Paul. And if I've actually on my Torah Apologetics series have taken a few episodes to show just how so many places that Paul kept Torah and he taught Torah to all of the churches that he traveled to in his missionary journeys. So his foundation was Torah. He upholds it. He speaks positively about it. He does it. He's literally arrested while doing it. So for anyone to claim that Paul taught, antinomianism or any form of lawlessness, they're highly mistaken, and that's the nicest way I can put it. And I just would encourage them to keep reading the scriptures. More importantly, keep reading Exodus through Deuteronomy so you can recognize what Paul's doing. Because if you don't even know what it looks like to do Torah, then you can be mistaken when you're reading Paul's actions. He promotes Torah, does Torah. So that is his foundational context for Paul. So for us to see some version of him talking about some aspect of something, and then to think that he's not, or he's teaching against Torah, would be contradictory to everything else in his ministry and his witness. So this concept right here, Adam, where it talks about all things are lawful, but all things are profitable. Again, if he's talking about the previous context from verses 14 through 22 about things that are awful to idols and not partaking with the house of idols and things sacrificed to demons, and what he's saying is this idea of anything you buy in the marketplace, and that's in verse 25, eating without questions for conscience sake, right? Because there's a distinction here with what was actually done for the food that was offered to idols. And they're not at a temple eating food offered to idols. They're eating something that would be in the marketplace. And for you to basically say, just because something you question or you suspect without knowing the history of where that meat came from, that it could have been offered to idols, and therefore you're going to break bread of fellowship with someone that's trying to make you a meal, right? Mm-hmm. This is to where, it runs into this line of are you being so judgmental and paranoid that you're now breaking the idea of showing love to your neighbor because he's trying to make a meal for you? Now, if this dude invites you to his house and he's got, a temple idol to Dagon sitting in his house, and he goes, prays and offers incense and sacrifices a strangled animal right in front of you, in front of this temple idol, and then tries to give you some of that meat, then you probably want to say no. But if you just bought it from the market, you have no idea. So I think it's personally, I've always seen this as Paul is addressing people that are kind of going overboard in fear about some of the practices of the people of the pagans around them. The same practices we saw in Acts 15, the new converts were being told not to do anymore, right? This is food offered to idols that was strangled. So this is the same concept of just like, look, man, show people love. Don't assume they're doing something dastardly to offer some food that's offered to idols to you, especially if it's just at their home and they got the meat from the market. So I think it's kind of like just take everything in the context of this chapter. And also we have to remember what Judaism was teaching that was a little different from Torah, and how they were telling them different types of weird things and putting weird boundaries around the regular Jews' interactions with the people from other nations. A great example of this is in Acts chapter 10, where the Italian Roman soldier, meets with Peter. And then Peter actually tells him in that exchange, well, it's against the law for me to interact with you, for me to come to your house.
Right.
But he's not talking about the law of God. He's talking about the law of Judaism.
Right, exactly.
He then goes on to tell the Italian soldier, and God had to reprimand me for this behavior, and now I'm here talking with you. You see what I mean? So there is a underlying theme in the epistle letters, especially with Paul, because he was constantly being persecuted by the sect of Judaism that he left, right? Which is they had all these laws imposed on the people that caused them to be kind of an elitist type of mentality amongst the Jewish people of the day compared to the other nations around them, which is what we see exemplified with Jesus and the lady from Sidon, where she refers to herself as a dog, right? And that's they called the Sidonians, which is not cool, right? And Yeshua helps her, heals her daughter, and interacts with her anyway, and so because she had faith. So
listen, I don't mean to interrupt. My son Daniel, he wanted to say hi, but he needs me real quick. Would you mind? You want to say hi real quick? You want to say hi? No, okay. Would you mind just picking out one more question from chat, and I'll be back in just a moment.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see if I can find a new question here in the chats, because we answered, or we tried to address 1 Corinthians 10. And I know people are wondering about the food only. Yes, and I'll hopefully try to address the different aspects of everything going into that conversation. But if there's any other questions in the chats, I don't think I see any right off the bat. But ultimately, I just hope people, when you're reading the New Testament, I would highly encourage that you research what the Pharisees of the day were teaching back then. I don't recommend reading the Talmud or the Kabbalah at all, but you can glean this stuff and what the apostles were trying to help people sort through by the topics that they're addressing, and why they're trying to teach their new converts what's good and proper from the Torah, as opposed to what the sect of Jews that was persecuting Paul, that was coming in. The whole book of Galatians is actually this type of narrative, where he comes in chapter 3, the famous passage, who's bewitched you, right? Who's come in and fooled you and imposed upon you this regulation to say that you got to be circumcised to be saved, when there's more to it than that, right? And that's not the only thing that's involved. And so he goes and breaks down a whole bunch of ideas from Torah, and he's teaching them Torah, but he's actually reminding them that he used to be a part of the Pharisees, his former way of life in Judaism, and that he has left that to follow Christ. So just like Christ, Yeshua tells us in Mark 7, Matthew 23, that the Pharisees were imposing on the regular people of that day burdens and extra rules and commandments of tradition that were not in the Torah, that the people just couldn't follow all of it. It was too much. It was a burden, which is why Yeshua says in Matthew 11, his is light, right? And he calls in Matthew 23:4, the Pharisees a burden put on people that is too much for them to bear, and they themselves don't lift a finger to help, because it was a way of imposing religious authority on people to get them to be subjective to you and to control them. And this was not done under the love of Torah. This was not done properly. The priests obviously were corrupted, because the ruling class of those priests killed Yeshua and the prophets and persecuted them unto death. So this is the same people that the apostles are now having to deal with, these false teachings, when they're going out to the people and trying to help them understand the true teachings of the actual Torah, of the prophets, to understand what God said was righteousness and what God said was love, compared to some of these other rules that were causing division and strife and burdens and oppression on the people. So this is why James, I love it, James 1:27, he refers to the Torah as the law of liberty, because that's what it is. It brings freedom when you actually do it, and it is the fulfillment of love, and that's I think that's just really important for people to take a slow reading of Paul's letters. And honestly, and Adam, I say this a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think if you haven't really studied the Torah, then I would just stay away from Paul for a minute. You know, like if you're new to the Christian faith and you come into faith and obedience in God, and you want to, the church will tell you to immediately start with, Romans, right, or Galatians. But I say start with Genesis through Deuteronomy and get to know the foundation first, upon which everything else is built, and then you can understand why the apostles are making decisions as they are and what Paul's actually teaching in his letters, because they're all following Torah and teaching Torah. You just have to know what you're looking at.
I agree. And again, if it looks like Paul is directly contradicting Torah or the words of Yeshua, well, it's I'm not going with Paul. We must have something wrong. Let's, like Sean said, let's slow down. Why don't we read a couple chapters before and a couple chapters after to make sure we're getting the whole context? Which, speaking of which, context. Let's take a look at Sean's channel. I'm gonna do a screen share for you guys. Let's see. Let's see here. Hang on. Here we go.
Yeah, Chris Wood made a great statement that the whole experience of the prophets and Yeshua were warning us, and Yeshua is called the great prophet, right? The one expected to come,
right?
And he's constantly warning us to repent, go back to the Torah. He's preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is all through the prophets and the Torah, and he's trying to help people weed through the bad teachings of their generation. I actually believe, Adam, that we're absolutely in the same boat that Yeshua was in his generation.
I fully agree.
Teacher.
I've been saying that for about a year now. I really feel like the things have come full circle. 2,000 years later, we're exactly where we were, where he was, where modern day religion was ran by, religion back then. Religious leaders was all doctrines of men that made of no effects the commandments. And that took precedence. Same thing with today. You have the Christian church. We have this completely different doctrine that makes of no effect his commandments. It's the same thing. And of course, you get the people getting upset with us because we actually want to keep the law, and we're spitting on grace, and it's just like ridiculous. But yeah, I agree. It's full circle. This is obviously my homepage here. So if you just stumbled upon this, make sure go ahead and subscribe. The subscribe button's not up here because it's mine, but go ahead and subscribe here. We always keep an updated recommended list of channels. Right here, Brother Sean here, Kingdom of Context. Let's go ahead and take a look over here. So go ahead and subscribe when you get some time. Tons of good stuff. Sean's actually really good about keeping his playlists up together. They do kingdom portions, which are like Torah portions. He's got different debates on here. Torah apologetics. I haven't been able to see all of them, but I've caught a few of these, Sean. They're really good. Well done here. So he does a lot of work here. Have you read Galatians? I love it because that's the number one thing that we get. Like when we're like, oh yeah, we love Messiah. We want to follow him, which means we like to keep the Sabbath and the feast. We like to keep whatever laws we possibly can. They're like, have you read Galatians yet? And so, yeah. So Sean does a good job of addressing a lot of those things.
It's a 4-part series on Galatians, and I tackle who Paul's audience was, which also Jesus and Peter spoke to, as well as who Paul's antagonists were, as well as who Paul was himself and what he taught. And then I actually tackle the biggest, toughest verses in Galatians as the 4th video. So It was fun.
Awesome. Morning Cup of Context. It's been a while since you've done one of these, hasn't it? But
because I've been so busy with everything, man. But yeah, morning cups are great because those are just short, little, to the point things taken out of context over time, and I try to address them just Do angels sin? What does it mean? Is Jesus the end of the law? That kind of stuff. Who was judged first, the church or the wicked? Just little stuff that people take. What is God's will for you? Just simple little stuff, but some are a little bigger as well. So I tackle topics that are easily and often taken out of context.
Right, I love it. Like you said, I cannot sin. Right, when that was it in James? It says, or is it First John? Or I can't remember.
John.
Yeah, First John. But yeah, you're like, oh yeah, see, here it is. I can't sin. So whatever I do, it's not sin. Like, is that what he really said? And so Sean goes over stuff like that. Who is the Almighty? Waters above heaven. So, anyways, yeah, just good little stuff here. So check out Sean when you get a chance. Excellent material here. He and his wife Lindsay do the Torah portions. When I have some time, I like to catch these too. A lot of good stuff there.
What's really popular is the debates. Is people seem to really love those. Because I actually tackle Trinitarianism, and I tackle, should we be keeping the law as part of our discipleship? And then I even interviewed a rabbi at one point, and we got to talk about Scripture. And it's like a 3-hour conversation, but man, we go deep.
Yeah.
So and I realized that he fulfilled. I say this with much love and respect to him, but this is an honest analysis of the debate itself. Okay, is that he fulfilled exactly what Yeshua said to the Pharisees in his day, where they said, if you believed Moses, you would believe me. And when I asked this guy if he believed Genesis 1-3 was literal and was real history, he couldn't answer me. And I was amazed. I was like, they actually don't believe the prophets. And I tried to ask him about Isaiah and Ezekiel, and he just skirted the issue. He thought it was all up for interpretation. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what Yeshua said.
Sure is. It's happening today. I agree. So again, you can always check out the recommended list here, brothers and sisters. And we're going to probably be ending this here in just a few minutes. For those of you that are late nighters, I'm going to be doing the Torah portions. Give me about a 10-minute break. And I need to get that stream set up and whatnot. But all you got to do is when you're done with this, just literally click on here. It'll take you into this waiting room. Here, I'll go ahead and dislike it. No, I'm just kidding. So you just wait in here, and I'll get started probably around 11 Central Standard Time. So this week, week 47, we actually went through some of the scriptures in here tonight, mainly Deuteronomy 14, but a lot to cover tonight. So join me if you're a late nighter. So, any case, let me stop screen share real quick. Okay. In any case, this is a awesome set of scriptures that we went over tonight. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, brother. Like I said, I love this book, man. And if you need more help when you get to the 30s, Jubilees like 31 through 34, I'd love to, if you have an opening and you want to have someone back on, because like that to me is one of the hinge points of understanding some prophecies about Yeshua, leading up to this idea of why it's so important to understand Leviticus and other things that help us understand our Messiah so much better, because you get to see what happens with the priesthood and why Jacob was so important and things like that. It's just beautiful, man. Jubilee is a beautiful book.
It is. And I was actually, you already said it, but I was going to ask you live on air, so put you on the spot. I was going to find out if you wouldn't mind joining us a couple more times. Maybe a couple more sections of this book. So when you get some time, just let me know of some other highlights in this book that you really enjoy, and we'll probably have you on a couple more times throughout this book. Because like I said at the beginning, I'm no Jubilees expert. I literally just wanted to read through this line by line, and just share what I believe the Spirit's put on my heart on these things and connecting scriptures. But this is Sean's baby. Sean knows this book very well, way better than I do. So I really enjoyed having you on here. It's a big help because I'm not as versed in this book as I am with Esdras and Baruch and Adam and Eve and a lot of these other books that we've gone through before. So really glad to have you back on. And for those of you that have follow the channel for a while, Sean and Ken had a segment on here for some time, and just it's good to have Sean back on. Period. So, anyways,
it was a lot of fun. I think if you're available, I want to ask you as well in return, because I was actually going to ask you if you want to come on for the season finale of Honor Kings Part 2 or season finale 2. of Honor of Kings, because I'm hoping to have some of the guys that I've already had on this year
Mm-hmm.
back on as well. And so kind of like have a group conversation if we can with maybe like 4 or 5 people, because I've had some other guests on this year. And so I'd love to have you back, because I want to actually do more like another, more about prophecy, and it ties all the apocryphals together. So in case the viewer doesn't know, usually Honor of Kings, we just stick to like one book at a time. But last year we did a season finale with Adam where we like went through a bunch of apocryphal prophecies, which are specific prophecies in the apocryphal books and the extra biblicals. And so, yeah, man, I want to do, but I want to specifically do, some other ideas. I'll shoot you a message about it.
All right,
Because
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're right. I did the last finale. Might as well do this finale too. That'd be good.
Right. Yeah. So we'll be filming that at some point here in the next few months. So we'll try to figure it out. Yeah.
Awesome. Housekeeping stuff. Could use you guys' prayers. I'm gonna be honest with you. I this morning I didn't know if I was gonna be able to make it on tonight. The last 2 weeks, it's been a test for me. I had a moment where I had to stop and ask myself, I had to stop and pray, like, most time, am I doing something wrong? Because I felt like everything was going wrong. A couple weeks ago, our family vehicle broke down. We spent like $900 to get it fixed, back on the road. Well, this week it broke down again. Oh gosh, what else? Oh man, what else broke? I'm like blanking. There's so much that's going on. My cat got into a huge fight, had a huge laceration. His wound ended up getting infected. He needed to take him to the emergency room, the animal emergency room. My dog has a huge infection on his side of his face. We had to take her to the vet today. And now what else happened? A couple of things happened. Well, you guys know I was pretty sad that Justin, had to step away. You guys know that my wife brought up divorce with me over keeping the commands and Shabbat and all that kind of stuff. And then I was thinking to myself yesterday, I was like, well, at least my kids are healthy. And this morning, my daughter fell off she was messing around. I literally took my eyes off her for just a second. She was on the kitchen bench. We have a table that has chairs on the ends for my wife and I, and then the children have a bench. She fell off, and the bench fell on top of her foot. It was instantly like a balloon. Her foot was like a balloon. It was all purple and yellow. We thought for sure she broke her foot. She's 2 years old too, so it was devastating. It was just a shrieking cry we'd never heard. And I was thinking to myself, why did I have to even think that thought? That it was at least my kids aren't involved in this. And I just kind of had a moment. I'm like, are you trying to tell me something? Like, am I doing something wrong? Like, should I stop this? I kind of just had a moment, like a Job moment. Now, no, my sufferings is nowhere near Job, but I kind of had a moment where, like, well, maybe this is all just a big test. And so this morning, long story short, this morning I didn't know if I'd be able to make it on because I thought we were going to be in the hospital all day. Thankfully, she didn't break anything. It was just a huge bruise, so such a blessing. We prayed so hard to make that she didn't have any broken bones, and thankfully she didn't. Poor thing, man. I mean, her little foot was like 2 to 3 times the size it was before. But anyway, so I could use your guys' prayers because obviously I'm in a time of testing again. It seems to go in seasons, right? You have like times of coasting and times of testing, and I seem to be in a time of testing, so I could use your prayers. I really, really appreciate it. So no, don't worry. I'm not stopping what I'm doing. I had to stop and think for a second, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, tell me, and I'll stop doing it. So anyways, just could use your guys' prayers. So anyways.
Wow, bro. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. A lot going on.
Yeah, man. Well, I always seem to notice, like, whenever I got something good transpiring, the enemy comes at you. He really does.
Yeah.
He doesn't want us affecting people. He doesn't want us getting this message out. He's just, so yeah. I'll pray for you, brother. Just keep pressing on.
Thank you. Yeah, I will for sure. That thought was in my head for a second. Like, are you trying to like tell me like I should just like stop, or like what do you want me to do? So I just
it reminds me of was it Paul when he was on house arrest and he was like for 2 years talking to the King Agrippa, and so this is a dude that's kind of like he's in custody, he's arrested, right? So he's on trial for his faith essentially, but he's like using that time to just talk to the people that are having him in custody to try to tell them about, Yeshua and the kingdom. And it's just like, I love the example of the prophets and the apostles, because it's like the enemy was clearly trying to take him out, because what they were doing was not, he doesn't want the love of Torah and the love of the gospel of the kingdom and the gospel of our wonderful Messiah, offering salvation to us. He doesn't want any of that stuff to be spread.
It's true.
And so he tries to hit us in every angle possible, so man, I'll be praying for you.
Well, it's funny, we've been talking about this last couple of weeks here, but we know that the modern day prosperity gospel is false, but to a certain extent, especially as I'm going through Deuteronomy and Jubilees, we see that there's a blessing of prosperity when you keep the commandments, right? So he promises us prosperity when we keep his commandments in that regard, but he doesn't promise us a perfect life and things not happening and bumps and bruises and broken bones and that kind of stuff. And even think back of thinking back to like Elijah, or not Elijah, Elisha. I mean, he did like some of the biggest miracles of any man to that date. And he withered away and died from some horrible disease, or so it's like we're not promised that it's going to be an easy ride or those kind of things, even when we're obeying him and keeping his commandments and those type of things. And almost like a lot of things, it's just a big test. So but to know that he's real, and he's there and he's watching, and even if we are suffering or things are going wrong, to continue to bless him and to follow him and to trust in him no matter what is thankworthy. Peter alludes to something of the sort. He's like, if you're corrected, or if you're buffeted for being a bad guy, well, and you take it patiently, what thank have you? But if things happen to you and you take it patiently, this is this is honorable, and yeah, I'm paraphrasing in God's eyes. So for those of you out there that are facing tests, I guess I say all that to say this, for those of you that are facing tests out there, or facing trials, know that it's just a test. He sees everything. He sees every move. He sees every intent of your heart. He knows what you're thinking. So keep yourself pure, keep your mind pure, and just trust him. And I know a lot of you out there are blessed with spouses that are along with you for this ride. I know, Sean, you're one of those. I know Lindsay is right there with you, and man, she is wise in the scriptures too. So you're a blessed man, and same with Justin's wife Jackie. Blessed. He's blessed to have her, along with this ride. Some of us don't have that, like myself, and I know there's a ton of you out there that are on the same path. So just keep it strong and run the race. It's worth it, it's worth everything. So maybe all that happened to me so I can tell you guys that, just to stay strong in the midst of the fire.
I think it reminds me of John 16:33, right? Yeshua says to them, these things I've spoken to you so that in me you might have peace. Mm-hmm. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. So it's just like, he's telling his disciples, you're going to be, Revelation 2, right? Endure temptation, endure testing. And, here in John 16, you're going to have troubles. It's like, to me, this is why there's so much prophecy about the day of the Lord, because this is this grand moment of salvation, not just because we're resurrected, spiritually saved, but also physical salvation for the world, to rid the wicked from the world, which causes all the oppression and tribulation and trouble, right? And so everyone starts learning Torah. There's peace on earth. You know what I mean? It's a beautiful time. And I think that's why that particular message is spoken about so much through all the prophets, just to give us that good light at the end of the tunnel, because this life is tough, man. It's not an easy cakewalk at all. And I would almost say that if your life is not tough in some regards, then you're not facing opposition, which means you're not given the ruler of this world a reason to oppose you. So it's like I think you're giving the enemy a great reason to oppose you, Adam. We already know your channel's being squashed I mean, I've seen, I've seen it, happening over the last few months. So I've been praying for you, and so
Thanks,
yeah,
brother.
man, I
Thank you.
just we'll be praying for you.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. Any final thoughts before we sign off, brother? And real quick, for those of you that want the show, that want to hear the shofar, you're gonna have to come over to the Torah portions with me. But
Awesome.
any last thoughts, bro?
No, I just want to thank you again, really, for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and I just be blessed, bro. Enjoy your Shabbat. Have a good time.
Thanks, brother. And yeah, and we're definitely gonna have you on at least one, maybe a couple more times as we finish this book. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, everyone. Next week we're actually gonna take a pause of reading Jubilees, and we're actually Jake Grant from Nixa TV is gonna be on. Jake's gonna be on to talk about his newest documentary, and yeah, just really looking forward to that. So. Yeah, so normal time next week, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, but we will take a pause on reading Jubilees, and Brother Jake is going to be on with us, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. Also, another we're going to have a random stream next week, Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 8:30. We're going to have Brother Brennan Fox. He is a he's a life coach slash personal finance expert, and tailoring specifically to Torah observant believers. So it ties in a lot of wise words from Proverbs and whatnot. And a lot of us honestly could use some financial guidance scripturally in these days. So this will be a great one to tune into. I'll have the event up here in the next few days, but again, that'll be Wednesday at 8:30 with Brother Brennan. It'll be specifically about finances, and then Brother Jake from Nixa TV will be here next Friday, and we'll be talking about his newest documentary. So, with that, let's end with some prayer. Brother, do you wanna lead us in some prayer to finish
Sure.
up?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Father, we love you. We just want to come before you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak your word to people, to help them be edified, to grow in the knowledge of you. We just ask that these words affect them, stick with them, and create in them the type of love that you exemplified in your Son. And I want to lift up Adam and his family right now, that you would bring restoration and peace completely all throughout his relationships with his friends and family. Father, Adam's a special guy, so I just put him before you, Father, just to protect him and to strengthen him. And also just thank you for everything that you put in his heart to do already, and the influence that you're already putting in his life already. So we just give you praise for that. And Abba, I just ask for everyone watching here this week, basically, they just develop a desire, a hunger to go after your word, to go after you, to dig in and apply it, and just walk in a type of obedience that brings peace, because that's what we strive to do. We just hope that we can communicate your words faithfully, and so that it inspires the hearts of others to do that as well. So I lay that prayer before everyone watching, for you, Father, to put that in their hearts. And we love you. We thank you for your days of rest that you've given us, and your feasts that are coming, your trumpets and Sukkot. We just give you praise. Thank you, Father. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, brother. Hey, brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. And again, we do this every Friday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And thanks for joining us. And oh yeah, I forgot the last thing. My the laptop that I have two computers. My Mac, which I do all the streams on, my studies on, and I have my laptop only because the program I like to use it only works for PC, not Mac. Anyways, my laptop that I use to make all my videos broke down on me yesterday, and it's beyond repair. So it's like, man, all this stuff. So anyways, that was the other major thing I forgot. So really could use your prayers, brothers and sisters, and thanks, Sean, for that prayer. And yeah, love you guys, and enjoy your Shabbat, and have some shalom in it. And again, if you're a late nighter, come on, join me over the Torah portions. Give me about 10 minutes. So, all right, Shabbat shalom.